Disinformation streams. Dating back to early cartoons, one can remember images of a mad scientist transferring consciousnesses of people or animals with people. This theme is pervasive throughout popular cartoons and TV programming. It is always spoofed with absurdity and the idea of that it is science fiction. I found early scientific research that really investigated EEG heterodyning using electrodes or electrostatic plate hats to read brainwaves and write them to someone else. This mind control pursuit is very old indeed. Cartoons have been used to discredit the science and anyone who speaks about it. Based on the idea that the CIA has utilized for over 50 years that it is best to hide secrets in plain view and nobody will see it, I will speculate that there is no reason that cartoons should be the first media to describe real top-secret research and spoof it in absurdity. Bioelectric communication signals are a very real active area of research throughout the world. Let's look at this possibility quickly using just logic and reason. If a neuron depolarizes at 70 mV and one can read 10 microvolts at the surface of the scalp using EEG probes, then hypothetically one should be able to apply an electric field of 70 x 10-3/10-5 equals 7000 volts at the scalp to induce a 70 mV field at the neuron. Since neurotransmitter release is the signaling mechanism between neurons and since it is proportional to voltage at the end of the axon, one can reason that high-voltage static electric helmets actually can affect neurotransmitter release. Add in the fact that neural networks self-organize with any electric signal and you can in fact combine brains using this biocommunication technique. The electric signals of those involved must be learned over time, but you can create larger brains this way, albeit mad. Even the recent cartoon Wallace and Gromit portrayed this consciousness swap with a rabbit and human as science fiction. The DOD never changed their methods even in 60 years. The best kept secrets hidden in plain view. Now of course 7000 volts is a large electric field gradient for a wireless electromagnetic wave, but shorter the wavelength more energy it carries, and other methods of head resonance were perfected to perform the same task. And since static electricity, that is ionic heating, can create the surface voltage, one only needs to move around the static electricity on a head or body to create the necessary field. Even low-frequency and low-intensity magnetic fields have been shown to have profound effects on the brain. And ion cyclotronic resonance was another investigated method. No research in longer-term learned biocommunication signals is currently occurring in civilian research in this country, again for obvious reasons because it is prohibited. The information bubble that Americans are confined within is truly amazing. We think we are the most important country and connected to the world because we have CNN and other news stations. Look at the vast selection of channels available to surf on cable. Intuitively we think we are free and informed based on the number of choices presented to us. Those that do not travel abroad to foreign lands very often cannot appreciate the contrast of world perspective and the tacit controls and compliance the mass media has with government through FCC pressures and other places. Scientific espionage against the United States population. Don't we have laws to stop the government from doing this on purpose by paroled disinformers? Who is policing the government? Who else publishes about scalar waves? Captain Robert Collins. Isn't it strange that all this bullshit science comes from ex-military personnel? Scalar waves are just standing waves or interference patterns. Nothing more. This is just holography in any wavelength and has been around since the 60s. The disinformation campaign is worldwide. I found articles in German, French, and Italian stating similarly ridiculous things like free energy and faster than light communications. Google had 1,240,000 hits for scalar waves. While scalar waves are a real concept, they are nothing new. In the military, beamforming is a type of scalar wave. You can completely shape the scalar or amplitude modulation of the carrier frequencies in 3 space. It is not such a big deal. Their connection with mind control technology is merely a way to pinpoint a human target and keep a lock on him/her, finding ways around most shielding attempts through a total hemisphere of attack angles as well as tracking multiple targets around the world. I have read so much bad science from ex-military personnel that I can only come to the conclusion that they are conducting mimic warfare on the scientific community at large. Most of the disinformation agents are retired. They want to keep the secret of Malik's and Stockland's patents so badly that they are willing to commit treason against the United States people and the Constitution. They are willing to torture people to death using psychic warfare and gather the statistics in order to get an extra decimal place in their human effects kill statistics data. The United States is getting more criminally brutal than ever before and improving their methods of lying and deceiving the public. It has reached epidemic proportions given the secrecy culture and justification to treat their bosses, the taxpayers, as cattle and the potential enemy. Every document that I have read that states that the Russians are doing so and so around the world, I find out that the United States is actually behind it every time. Lying is treason and needs to be punished severely, whether you are a general, director of the CIA, or the president. The CIA first fed radiation to thousands of people to watch the progress of cancer and possibly a mechanism of tracking from space. Then they torture children for ultra assassination programming. Then they dose people with various drugs including LSD and BZ. They tried a biological warfare virus over San Francisco. Now they are torturing people to death for years with electromagnetics. Do you see the trend? Did I congratulate you on living in the land of freedom? Don't worry, your government is in control again. Every real scientific paper I've read that happens upon the topic of bioelectromagnetic non-ionizing radiation effects comments on the fact that there is so little literature on it. In other non-NATO countries it is a much bigger field. A publication by the FDA doing a comprehensive food sanitizing method survey had many military representatives on the board. The paper commented on how there was almost no literature on microwave effects. A paper on implanting a small piece of wire in the head or body for biotelemetry commented on how they could find almost no data on such an obvious application. We are bathed in microwave energy. How come there is so little independent investigation in this area, especially in light that the head acts as a microwave cavity and neurons as microwave transceivers? There are earth-shattering patents from the 70s and 80s on brainwave amplification, brainwave reading at a distance, and brainwave modulation using a wide range of frequencies. How is this being ignored? Pretty obvious what is going on, isn't it? Modern-day Timothy Leary. Shulgun is well known for his experiments in psychoactive drugs that avoid scheduling because he creates analogs of known molecular types. I have not been able to uncover any documents that connect his research with CIA mind control like his predecessors. However, his experimentation may be tolerated because it goes hand in hand with mind control drug research the CIA has been pursuing for decades. Those that experiment with his drugs might be CIA guinea pigs. Remember that Charles Manson used LSD to create his mind control cult. Test patterns. I was able to interview over 500 people that know they are/were electronically harassed, slipped drugs, fed radiation, ultra mind controlled, or directed energy weapons test victims. Several have died while writing this book. They range from children to the elderly, from poor to wealthy, from religious to atheist, from uneducated to educated. People are chosen at random like in all their other tests. There is a segment that is overwhelmingly large for a random testing pool, and that is government whistleblowers. FBI agents, military personnel, or cops in particular are targeted by these weapons if they testify against other government agencies. It is just so heartbreaking to hear all these stories. I met a few families where everyone was targeted suddenly with voice to skull and with the EEG replay of the pains which they are collecting and storing from other people. Most people get a slight variation of all Tammy's capabilities, I assume, to make any test patterns less noticeable. Some people only get voice to skull, Stockland's patent. Some only get tortured and physically manipulated limbs. Some get the remote ultra programming. I was unlucky. I got a demonstration of the full works of mind control technologies and Satan. Satan, silent assassination through amplification of neurons, is the program to try and kill the target through car crashes, heart attack, depression and suicide, self-destructive behavior, neglect, or to be a programmed assassin. They were somewhat fair in that they told me ahead of time using the synthetic telepathy, exactly how they were going to try to kill me each day. They told me every torture they were to inflict on me ahead of time. It was oddly routine for them. They said that they had successfully killed an artist in San Francisco with a heart attack, a woman pediatrician, and an old lady in a nursing home. They felt pretty confident that they could kill me with EEG cloning. The 200 people in their weapons testing group were competing for points according to the main heterodyne project leader. Those that gained enough experience points could go on to the psychic assassins and mind controllers team who work on real projects like World Leaders after they collected the effectiveness of the pain data, collected the mind control statistics, and mapped the unique brain waves that I had for their database. Angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other. Good alien bad alien, yet another derivation of the good cop bad copy interrogation and control method. In product marketing, one learns that to disentangle the importance of factors in the appeal and success of a product you need to conduct a survey. A well-designed survey uses a correlation matrix to determine the factors that affect the outcome. Questions are designed so that every possible combination is tried. In the Mind Control Ultra survey, Combinations of overt suggestion, subliminal, brain entrainment, and EEG heterodyne forced wool are used to determine how effective each method is in combination with the others. So part of the program entails conflicting commands by the possibly outsourced CIA weapons testers. You hear one command in one ear like an angel saying don't do it, and the devil in a different voice or nearly subliminal auditory level, do it. These conflicting directives in combination with all the other techniques is how statistical correlation data is collected to determine the effectiveness of each method on your particular personality. If you are ever in this position, it may not be an angel or devil on either shoulder but something far worse called the United States Black Ops Mind Control Star Wars Defense Project, going under the highly classified acronym, TAMI. Weapons testing, faulty analysis of costs, risks, and poor scientific methods. The Black-Scholes modeling of military risk and uncertainty would need to be employed in order to correctly do the total cost and benefit analysis of human capital for testing weapons on the public. By the way, Melissa Black, the daughter of the Black-Scholes model of options pricing and MIT professor, is hot and was in my dorm at Harvard. I transgress, back to slamming the idiots that we put our blind trust into. When running the mind control experiments, the data gatherers would give conflicting commands through subliminal and overt channels along with other techniques. This is a statistical approach to tease out the weighted influences of each method. The scripts. The EEG heterodyning psychic soldiers want-to-be's doing the weapons testing are trained to follow a plethora of scripts used to confuse the target during the torture and make the target appear crazy when they seek help from a doctor. In almost all the cases, the belief that a microchip or tooth transponder, like in the movie, Real Genius, is responsible for the conversation without a cell phone is suggested to the target. That actually sounds more reasonable given the average person's knowledge of this technology or directed energy weapons capabilities. Only in victims of 10 years or longer are small biotelemetry antennas found in X-rays, which used to be used for pinpoint tracking to direct the energy, thereby amplify the biosignal for EEG cloning. The scripts then progress to making the person believe that specific people or groups are behind their torture. In many cases, people heard the voice of JFK, JFK Jr., Bill Clinton, and Hillary Clinton. Sometimes, it was a famous person. Often it was just someone they knew in their past. Clearly, the EEG heterodyners are manipulating votes by always using Democrats' voices or trying to get them killed if the victim believes it. Bill Clinton mentioned the right-wing conspiracy during his downfall. This would back the known political slant of extreme right-wing ideologies in the CIA/DOD that border Nazi values. Using these people's voices as the most common ones heard by victims should point out whom they are gunning for. Do you still have doubts that the voting and political system isn't manipulated by these folks? They practice changing the beliefs of their victims using the different scripts. When you interview as many as I have, you can easily see the pattern once the personalization of the scripts is removed. The weapons testers get to choose which scripts are to be used on a project. They then personalize them for that particular project and must get approval for it. The weapons testers are in a strange culture, to say the least. They have a strict protocol for doing things, but no restrictions on who they kill or what collateral damage is done. From creation to chaos. Another project name for the EEG cloning and cataloging operations and media strategic deception was called Project Chaos. The sole goal of these groups in psychological warfare, CIA mind control, and INSCOM strategic deception is to create errors of judgment and reasoning and vocabulary confusion by every means possible. They have perfected control of the media through leaks and strategically placed disinformers in the industry. They have perfected disinformation on the internet using the method that plays off of people's black and white thinking by flooding it with partial truths and lies. And finally, they have found a way to inject bioelectromagnetics errors into people's brains directly using misnamed umbrella classifications of technology like non-lethal weapons, which contains EEG heterodyning, psychic warfare, and another overlapped classification of directed energy weapons. They have used the pseudosciences of the psychology community to create and propagate misdiagnosis of weapons testing effects as mental illness. They have used Hollywood and television to program the masses to discredit anyone who talks about something that was labeled as a work of fiction, such as a movie or shown on the science fiction channel. Acceptable mind games. Gambling is a legalized form of a head game that is quite lucrative. People from all walks of life gamble partly because of the entertainment value, but more often because they believe in luck or that they have a system. The mathematics of gambling is quite well known and defined. Logically, unless you cheat, you cannot win in the long run. Yet, based on the simple common delusion that all people share, we think we can find a way to beat the house odds. I, for example, knowing that every event is independently random still can trick myself into believing that if I see a streak of 5 or more in a row of one color in roulette that I can beat the odds by betting against that streak. The probability of getting 5 red numbers in a row is 1/2, 5 or 1 out of 32. But that doesn't actually affect the independent random event of the next spin. I must say that I haven't lost yet with that strategy, but that is the addiction of gambling. People derive superstitions about luck by falsely identifying patterns where there are none. Sounds like the same symptoms as schizophrenia, seeing patterns where there are none. Some people call the state lotteries a stupidity tax. Tell that to the winner. The psychology of crazy. It is interesting to poll people as to what they believe crazy means. The average person's intuitive understanding of the word usually means to do or say something very unusual or bizarre. Geniuses and eccentrics have throughout history been called crazy. My father is a very conservative man, and he calls about a third of everyone he meets crazy. People who visit San Francisco from a conservative culture, thinks the whole city is crazy. The trend that I have found is that less worldly experiences one has, the more often one judges behavior that is not native to their own culture as some form of mental illness. This is clearly an error to believe that something that has not been thought, heard, or seen before is some kind of pathology of the mind. When one has many errors of thinking, it could be classified as mental illness, unless the errors of thinking are being induced electromagnetically through TAMI. Stop the signal and the brain will regain its normal processing. But this is an important psychological observation, that these discrediting tactics are regularly and historically used by the CIA and PSYCL ops. Create a scenario that is so improbable, like government goon squads or being abducted and tortured, and the majority of people will think the person reporting it is crazy, simply because it is so unusual. Image if you were one of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims, and you escaped and you told a story about a man who eats dead people, keeps them in his fridge, and drills holes in their heads to try and create a sex zombie to the police. We know this happened, but the police would most likely have locked you up in the psyche ward for showing delusional symptoms. In fact, the police returned a boy who was bleeding from his head, naked, confused, and didn't speak English very well, back to Jeffrey Dahmer, and within 10 minutes after the police returned the kid, he killed and ate him. Jeffrey Dahmer used the same tactics as the CIA successfully. Of two possible scenarios, which was more believable? Jeffrey told the police that he and the boy were fighting, homosexual lovers. So this is how the game is played. Get some famous psychologists on your payroll. Have them create new mental illness like thought sonorization. And you can label anyone as mentally ill who speaks about the voice of God, weapons, microwave hearing effect, mind-reading radar, or ultrasonic heterodyning technologies that you wish to keep out of the population's awareness. As time progresses over the decades, the new mental illness will gain more credibility due to its age and number of people reporting it. I tracked back several mental illnesses to the same time frame as TAMI came online and to known mind control monster psychologists on the CIA payroll like Cameron. This has allowed the human effects weapons testing industry on the population to expand and go unrecognized. 1% of the population has schizophrenia. According to some psychological studies, over 20% of the population has some form of mental illness. Perhaps the categories are getting too broad. See the appendix for my facetious comments on many popular illnesses. What percentage of those classified as mentally ill are genetic and environmentally caused, and what percent is government menticide? The two groups overlap significantly. Through my protected sources, I was told that government weapons testers look for brain waves that show 3 traits that they want. One is an amplification factor of neurons often found in dopamine-excessive brains. This group has traditionally been known to exhibit psychosis. The other is brain entrainment inducibility, indicative of a high susceptibility to hypnosis. The third is the uniqueness of the brain waves to add to the database, which increases the effectiveness of TAMI for other people. Other factors for target selection include the ease of discrediting and isolating the victim. Of course, being a disobedient politician or a government whistleblower will increase your chances of being thrust into the virtual hell and beginning your journey into madness. There is no other word for this program other than diabolical. Can you feel the pride of being American coursing through your veins? Psychopathy and sociopathy for human weapons effects experimentation is not uniquely found in serial killers and government agencies. But it is the worst and truest form of mental illness. Strategies to paralyze the victims. Victims of testing are left dysfunctional and rarely are they allowed to work. The strategy is to mimic the dysfunctionality of mental illness and drain the victim's resources so that they cannot find help or shielding. The other reason for this is to make sure that they cannot get a security clearance. During the background check for security clearances for any Department of Defense contractors, they look for any signs of mental illness or financial strain, probably to weed out those people that might be seeking revenge for their senseless destruction. You must keep in mind how many decades the death lottery has been going on. It started after World War II and Project Paperclip, where thousands of Nazi scientists were smuggled into the United States. Since then, human effects for drug, radiation, mind control, and now directed energy weapons testing has occurred in ever-growing numbers despite the attempts by Congress to stop it. White House psychos. On April 9, 2006, another person attempted to contact the president directly by running onto the White House lawn shouting that he has very important intelligence information. He was promptly taken down by the Secret Service. This is a typical script that the handlers use on their victims. To discredit and see how far they can go, they often convince mind-controlled experiment victims that this is a Russian takeover with a new weapon of mass destruction that only the victim knows about. The victim, being a patriotic American, will do anything to convey the information. When disbelieved by the FBI and other authorities, they resort to desperate measures to do the right thing. These victims did not do their homework and realize how large the test group is and how long it has been going on. Scam and strategic deception groups need psychos in the news to account for the population of mental illness who have similar claims around 5 different scenarios. Periodically publicized incidences like this one is enough to keep the programming of the masses intact. We won't hear about the details of this person's need to convey intelligence to the president, but I guarantee it is about this mind control technology. They attempted similar head games with me 3 days before my torture began. They asked leading questions like, "Can you get close to the president?" "I know where this is going," I replied. Information streams. How the mass media is misused by the propaganda machine, aka psychological operations, or Cyclops the myopic, one-eyed monster as they joke about. In order to understand the psychology employed by various agencies and political forces, one must study the patterns of misinformation on the mass news media, popular publications, and the internet. First, let's look at the internet. I have been working with Truth.org, a privately funded internet archive system. Their tools allow me to view any information ever posted on the internet for a 3-month duration using their tool called the Wayback Machine. This has allowed me to research the patterns of disinformation websites, who owns them, what psychological tools they use to cover up information leaks, etc. As it turns out, their formulas are pretty standard and much of the trash is computer generated, even in foreign languages. I worked on natural language information parsing and collection algorithms for CIA knowledge organizing projects, but nothing that purposefully would generate misinformation. However, they easily could have been adapted for them. Cyclops, Scam, CIA, DIA, and electronic warfare divisions use many of the same tools but run their own campaigns. Just to show you how well the information stream gridlock works, type in mind control into Google to see how much information there is on supposedly something that is science fiction. People don't have time to waste their lives writing about this topic if it wasn't real or if they weren't paid as disinformants. There are 293 million hits on Google. Are you scared yet? Start clicking through the links. It is beyond experiments on the public, it is now a well-orchestrated takeover using just information weapons. The psychotronic concentration camps are growing rapidly. It is a matter of time before you are brain-napped and then you wished you hadn't stayed so ignorant and quiet, hoping it won't happen to you. The Soul Stealer is doing good business under the United States flag. I worked on integrating HARP and the Puerto Rico ionic heaters that are often implicated in the global mind control network, and I had no idea what they were used for. That's how secret this technology is. I was told they were command and control centers. But from those locations the entire world can be viewed by bouncing their signals off of the ionosphere in a configuration they call over-the-horizon radar. Satellites make better over-the-horizon sensors, so this is probably a tagline phrase to mean psychotronics. Foundations of reality. The whole illusion of gentility and freedom relies on lifelong programming of this image and repetition of mantras, pledges, imagery, and anthems. Asking someone to imagine an alternate government system that was in place that is exactly the opposite to what people have experienced their entire lives, is like asking someone to suddenly believe in another god. Their entire belief system and foundation of reality must be changed to accommodate the new model. Most are unwilling and incapable of this kind of reality shift without a direct demonstration. But in order to get the demonstration, they would permanently be enlightened to the truth and cannot be put back into the blissfully ignorant matrix of delusion. This is the catch-22. Most targets will find it futile to awaken others and be viewed as crazy if they try. This is how the system of controls is maintained and drastically important information for the people is suppressed. Inducing delusions. How is delusional thinking induced in a target? Some of the long logical thought trains which are based on a faulty assumption are due to the amplification of the target's own brain signals. In addition, the EEG hive conspirators simply need to agree and reassure the target that those are the right ideas. Since the target is usually isolated socially, this is naturally their only source of feedback. The feedback is of course untrustworthy, but it is difficult for one to adapt to a faulty source that mimics sources that one usually trusts, people. This again amplifies confidence levels of ideas and thereby multiplies the logical errors downstream of inferences and conclusions. This is the fundamental flaw with our governmental system, especially the military. If you surround yourself with yes-wo/men, you will be getting a false reassurance of the correctness of your ideas. This is what creates delusional thinking and is being used as an information weapon tactic. To worsen the collective intelligence of the organization is the fact that the culture practices false signaling in their communication style. Generals bark out orders to signal extreme confidence. Pure black or white thinking is practiced. Information is lost without the confidence level, as any information theorist or statistician can tell you. Add the fact that there is little feedback or information flow from the lower levels, since they must just follow orders, sprinkle in some egos for extra irrationality, and you have the perfect recipe for a destructive intelligence system. Truly frightening that they are in control of all the weapons. Catching the slow fat white rabbit. If this topic of dark American history interests you, you merely need to replace aliens with Department of Defense and terrorist with CIA programmed assassin while you research, and you will have much of the truth. To understand the imaging technology that is operating on the American citizens, you only need to study the stars. All technologies advanced under the auspices of space research actually get implemented and used on the people. To understand what psychotronics is, research the capabilities of ionospheric heaters and distributed radio telescopes in the context of directed energy weapons and a full-spectrum, Earth-gazing microscope. The common curse of mankind, folly and ignorance. Shakespeare. Troilus and Cressida, Act 2, Scene 3. It is difficult enough for people to learn and understand. We spend a third of our lives in school. It is difficult to comprehend the thinking it took the militants to decide to declare an informational war on the very country and people that they were sworn to protect and uphold the words of the founding documents and ideals of this nation. All foreign governments clearly have deciphered these technologies as much as I and others have, so the only conclusion that you can draw is that the CIA/military are not afraid these secrets will fall into the wrong hands abroad, but that they do not trust the citizens with these secrets and have even declared psychological and informational war on us. Reign of Terror, the Dark Ages. Military and CIA engineered war and terrorism. Cry havoc, and let slip the dogs of war. Shakespeare, Julius Caesar, Act 3, Scene I. CIA incompetence or planned treason. They wouldn't be seeking intelligence if they already had it. The oxymoron of intelligence agencies. Bin Laden was a known terrorist far before he orchestrated 9/11s. His brainwave signature has to be in the database and he should be able to be spotted anywhere in the world. In many people's opinion who know global surveillance capabilities, the government doesn't want to catch him. The CIA goofed on informing the right agencies about the impending attacks on the World Trade Center, then they somehow are goofing on being able to track specific people around the globe. One obvious reason is they don't want to show their hand and demonstrate beyond doubt that they even have this capability. Secondly, where would their and the warrior class jobs go if we didn't have enemies? Thirdly, we wouldn't be able to justify to the public invasions of Middle Eastern countries if we couldn't link them to the 9/11 event in some way and have an outstanding thread to accuse countries of helping him. Problems with our democratic election process. Why career military and CIA should never be elected president? How can you expect someone who barely tasted freedom to value it as much as those who have? The government organizations are not democratic by nature and free speech certainly is not tolerated. Someone who you want to lead this country to its agreed upon future should only come from the culture that represents those ideals. Macbeth by William Shakespeare. When Ross uses the same title, Macbeth protests, "The Thane of Cawdor lives, why do you dress me in borrowed robes?" Thane of Cawdor's robes. In borrow robes, Macbethian warlords throughout the military and Pentagon are just peasants in borrowed robes with no noble qualities whatsoever. The Thane of Cawdor had been treacherous at the Battle of Fife, and now we have a similarly treacherous group testing weapons on their employers, the American taxpayers. These warlords are more like the petty Greek gods who acted like children but had access to power. And as irony would have it, history repeats itself. Macbeth, who inherits the borrowed robes, kills King Duncan in betrayal. Macbeth was modeled after real events that took place. The story as it was told to me, is that 7 of the king's sons fled to America not long after the king's death, one of which I am a descendant. Of course that may just be a fun genealogic tale passed on. Miscellaneous cloak and dagger games. While this fact isn't relevant to this investigation, I thought it an interesting tidbit that I came across while chasing the White Rabbit. Some KGB agents had surgically implanted clay contained in a plastic pouch into the chin, cheekbones and nose area of agents. With just a quick push in various parts, they could remodel the major features of their face. Executive branch corruption goes high, wide, and deep. If there is any doubt how deep the corruption goes, we only need to be reminded of a comment made out of anger and haste. On October 24, 1990, President George H.W. Bush's White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater discussed Republicans who had opposed the president's policies, threatening, if they can sleep with their conscience, let them try. He cautioned that while they were free to say whatever they want, penalties might ensue, but we never discuss it in public. He suggested that they would suffer in their private purgatories. Pressed for an explanation, he responded, I can't tell you. If I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise. Any one of the thousands of people who have been EEG clone tortured knows exactly what this threat means. Bush's father made several references to the technology in his speeches. A private purgatory is how your own mind is used against you with increasing paranoia. Thought amplifications of your fears fed back into your brain is another way of phrasing it. One signal that they test in order to see if they can keep soldiers up and functioning without any drugs for days works quite well and is termed artificial caffeine. Dream manipulation is extremely effective to persuade people to think differently. Dreams can be fully manipulated like a joint interactive movie creation. Hollywood should take notice to the applications. However, once again I sigh, and just think how many people had to suffer and die so that a weapon used in the most anti-democratic way can be used to control the masses and politicians via threats or directly. It only took a few corrupt, dishonorable men to do this to our country and way of life. I don't know if there is any way to stop them now except a mass awakening of the people, which is proving impossible. Even the Iraqis have been complaining about microwave hearing effects being used against them along with other directed energy weapons. They are targeting radio towers that they believe to be responsible, probably not realizing it can all be done with satellites and over-the-horizon radar. If you can get your news from outside the United States and break through the information bubble by which we are oppressed and controlled, you can more easily see what is truly happening in the world. If you knew the capabilities of the global surveillance systems, you would know that it could not be possible for the United States to lose the whereabouts of bin Laden. You would know that the CIA didn't just mess up and not stop 9/11s. Events have been planned to persuade the 300 million people in this country to back aggressive expansion and justify tightening of domestic surveillance and to change the public attitudes about these secret mind control and thought-reading weapons of tyranny. If the public attitude ever does change significantly because of government-planted terrorist fears, any hope of maintaining and restoring a democracy will be history. The Psychic Army. No one knows the exact size of the United States or Russian psychic armies, but we do know they have been increasing. We can only gauge the size based on those that complain and are told through the synthetic telepathy that they are target practice, cannon fodder to hone the army's skills. Those people who are successful remote heart attack targets or written off as crazy are not counted. Nor are those that are experiments in love or other emotions or simply could never guess that they were being manipulated. Would you want to know if you were suffering immense pain due to betrayal of your government? You'd be happier to think it was just an unidentified ailment and seek Eastern or holistic medical treatments. They're out of their mind controllers. The agencies and upper rank of the Pentagon need to be flushed due to the corruption and incompetence. Newt Gingrich even recently suggested this. When the Russians had infiltrated the CIA and FBI back in the 80s with double agents that reached the highest levels in those organizations, it was lucky that we found them and we were able to completely overhaul those agencies. Well, what if we did just the reverse and threw out the patriots? Behind the curtain of secrecy with a bunch of obedient sociopaths, they would then have the power to take over this country from the inside out. The incompetence in these organizations that even President Bush commented on, could be orchestrated through just a few high-level traitors. It is simply fact that they are organizing unnecessary wars and training and funding terrorism using a variety of ultra and mind control tactics. When mass violence erupts like Columbine high school shootings or postal shootings, we say they went crazy. What if all these historical events could be traced back to CIA mind control experiments that continue to this day, or a secret mind control war between the Russians and the United States? Would you feel betrayed that you weren't told the truth by the government agencies behind it? Most of the educated elite who keep their pulse on the whole population often comment that it seems like there has been a systematic dumbing down of the population, especially in math, physics, and science in general. What better way to keep the conspiracies of UFO abductions alive for many decades? How better to force people to join the military rather than have a draft through increasing the separation of classes? According to Pentagon documents, soldiers are still cheaper than robots. Once the cost of a machine that kills effectively comes down, we won't need soldiers. We have the technology. It is simply a matter that human life still replicates more cheaply than building the machines to do the same task. Similarly, the citizens are viewed by the warlords as cattle to be butchered for experiments and as batteries to fill their Defense Department coffers with tax dollars to continue to help them get their power fix and satiate their need for false purpose of their lives dedicated to control, domination, and eventual enslavement of the entire population of the planet. There is a new world order due to the unchecked powers in government that is leading to a very dark future. Peace is not an option for the powers that be. They do not get financial or motivational benefits from peace and a shrinking defense budget. War, what is it good for? The war against terrorism, which is just a guerrilla war like any other, was instigated by the United States foreign policies over many decades. The news would like you to believe they hate us because we are infidels. Or they hate us because they are jealous of our wealth as a nation. They don't know what's good for them, and we are just trying to free them from a dictator that we supported with weapons and training in the Iraq and Iran war. They are building weapons of mass destruction which they are going to use on us. How easily Americans forget who divided up the Middle East to begin with. Who gave arms to Iraq and Iran? Who put the leaders in power? Who has occupied the countries with troops? Why do people buy into this bullshit spouted over the news? They hate us because we are using them and controlling them. We used them in the Cold War against Russia in the Iraq/Iran war. It was not about those two countries. They figured it out and have a lot of resentment. They are a sovereign country and feel they have the right to build any weapons they want, and the United States should get out of their affairs. They then played the religion card to mind control their people into fighting, just as Bush used it when calling them the axis of evil. More people have died throughout history due to leaders using a god's name to back them and to motivate support for their cause than any other reason. The same mind control games work today. The enemy within. We will have the United States cities nuked at some point due to seeming mistakes of foreign policy. Perhaps opening the ports to be controlled by foreign governments was an attempt at this. This is part of the long-term plan for reasons to expand. It will give the United States warlords the support and excuse they need for an all-out attack on the non-NATO countries. I don't know of a way out of the current model of world domination, the New World Order, that the power-addicted and corrupt investors in the defense industry are using. They have had the technology to stop wars and make peace using the system of TAMI or mind, but they chose the less noble routes each and every time. At the surface, this strategy of self-attack seems retarded. Why would elements within the United States government want terrorist attacks? What better way to justify to the people more funding, more power, more secrecy, and more expansionism? It is a sacrifice as they view it to get everyone to agree fervently to the war on terrorism and terrorist countries. You can see the public opinion manipulation at so many levels even within the government staff itself. It only took a few people to orchestrate these events and future ones. They are still the minority within the government secrecy decree, but they manipulate all the others easily through trickle-down orders or more devious tactics of threats and blackmail, like Bush Jr.'s spokesman to the Republicans, "You will suffer in your own private purgatories if you get out of line." Even the Oklahoma bombing serves the same purpose of justifying a crackdown which many believe was another mind-controlled assassination attack, given his untelevised testimony, which fits perfectly with the thousands of others put through the Ultra mind control program. I have not been able to find one example where the psychological manipulation tactics discovered through the CIA's mind control research programs have yielded a positive benefit to the United States. They have mostly been using their discoveries to control the opinions and people in the United States to support their causes of more money and more control. This is psychological warfare on the citizens who paid for the research and is nothing short of treason. But it appears that the apathy levels are too high. People are too caught up in their own local drama in this country to save it from the same fate as other countries who allowed their military-industrial complexes to cycle out of control. You must remember that the United States government has historically sacrificed its citizens for military might in the radiation-feeding experiments of tens of thousands of people and many other crimes. Sacrificing a building of people or a plane full of people to further a military strategy of quickly changing the mindset of the supporting population for global expansionism is a small price to pay in their opinion. That's only a few hundred to a couple thousand people. That far less than the number they kill in a year by maintaining secrets and hoarding technologies. That is far less than the numbers that they have killed directly with human effects weapons testing. So it isn't a far stretch for the sociopaths to create newsworthy events to influence public opinion for their own objectives. Also, it is interesting to note the blatant hypocrisy of our government. Mind control technologies are inherently communistic in goal. We were taught that communism is bad because you can't say what you want without being imprisoned and tortured, you are told what to do, and things are decided for you, etc. The mind-reading and influencing directed energy weapons technology along with the CIA Ultra experiments and information warfare on the United States is not a military exercise like they would pawn off to the budgeters, but a true takeover of a communist-like government who found ways to cover it up better with lies and plausible denial. We were overthrown, but most people just aren't aware of it yet. Psychotronically instigated wars. Recently several the United States reports on mind control technologies were translated into Hebrew and published in Israel. We have communications from victims there too. They say that the perpetrators use the cover story that they are Israeli Secret Service doing the testing on them. This is the pattern and technique that is being used throughout the world. The United States facade government can openly support a country while the shadow government instigates the wars. I am certain that many people from the axis of evil countries have been tortured by the United States psychotronic weapons and made to believe Israel was behind it. The Jews are fools if they can't see that the friendship from the fascist country is fake and merely being used as a political tool to justify invasion of countries we don't yet control. It wouldn't take much to invade Israel with a justification that they have nukes if relations ever soured and their leaders became disobedient. There have been many incidences in the last few decades in the time frame of which Satan and Tammy came online where psychos committed acts of violence and said that Satan or the devil made them do it. They could have been inadvertently telling the truth. The voices commanding actions are projected through the United States weapons system whose acronym is Satan, silent assassination through amplified neurons, that is the United States mind control. Myth sponsored by the military. The Philadelphia experiment. The myth goes like this. The Navy conducted an experiment with a ship that would transport it in time and make it invisible. The ship disappeared and no one saw it again. In reality, this was one of the first experiments in radar cloaking technology. The vessel's hulls were draped with vertical and horizontal wires which cancelled electromagnetic energies directed at them, thereby making it invisible to radar and a particular part of the M spectrum. The ship of course was still visible with binoculars. But this is a good example of the power of the propaganda disinformation machine. Alien autopsies and spaceship crashes. Area 51 was the classic setting for duping the public into this long-standing myth, setting the stage for countless atrocities committed against citizens. Initially, isolated rednecks were the target of human experimentation because they were easily discredited. Their boldness has stepped up in the last decade, conducting alien abductions to a politician, FBI agents, military personnel, professors, a New York City cop, etc. They have been successfully at discrediting these people in the media. The BBC wrote that over 25 million Americans believe they had alien contact. I haven't done my own survey to validate this rather large number, but it matches with the capability of the EEG heterodyning system in place since the mid-70s. UFOs. There are two types of military exercises that people report as UFO sightings: experimental aircraft designs being tested and directed energy weapons. With EMP weapons, electromagnetic pulse, you can stall a car. People involved in UFO sightings with black helicopters flying by, often reported that their cars stalled and their radio started changing stations. Directed energy weapons alter the radio frequency modulations and would have this effect. A phenomenon known to scientists that work with high-energy physics is air sparking or atmospheric excitation. When the energy density becomes great enough, the nitrogen and other molecules will begin to glow. So an uneducated observer will see a bright bluish ball in the sky, zipping around at improbable velocities. Chemtrails. I am not an expert on chemtrails, so I can't speak to all their purposes. Spraying barium or aluminum particles in the air will act as a radar shield and are experiments in cloaking technology, since countries have figured out how to track the stealth bomber by using the background cell phone radiation from satellites. Chem sprays can also be used to test biological weapons, like was done over San Francisco in the 70s and the reason Olson was killed by the CIA. Other operations have included using chemical tracers by lightly dusting an area that can be fluoresced in some invisible wavelength. Long-term health risks are unknown. Bermuda Triangle. I have no evidence from military documents released through the Freedom of Information Act to support my inference about the mysteries surrounding this area, other than one of the largest terrestrial radar dishes exists on the island of Bermuda near Ross Perot's estate. Take a helicopter ride over the island to view it. The descriptions by pilots affected and downed by violent and strange electromagnetic forces that would spin their compass needles and interfere with their navigation instrumentation are classic side effects of directed energy weapons, and in particular scalar weapons. Some people might speculate if JFK Jr.'s plane wasn't downed in a similar fashion and assassinated like his father. Short of a confession, it will be impossible to prove the exact sequence of causalities leading to these tragedies, and therefore will reside in the realms of conspiracy theory and speculation. Psychic Warfare Unit at the Pentagon. Lynn Buchanan and colleagues have written up their experiences as psychic warriors for the military. Unbeknownst to them, was the fact that they were heterodyne for their psychic feats. This is why the military doesn't care that a top-secret project is now extensively written about by these guinea pigs. It was a secrecy layer to ensure that they promoted more nonsense about mystical psychic phenomenon to cover up the truth about the science behind mind melding. Psychological experimentation cover-ups. Brain chip implants. Several military personnel who were considered disobedient were committed to psychiatric hospitals where brain implant experiments were conducted on them. These atrocities were covered up, and people who had them surgically removed were systematically discredited by the usual formula. Scientific America September or October of 2005 had an article about Delgado, who conducted much of the human brain chip implants and lobotomies, touting him as the father of this field. He came out of hiding from Spain back to San Diego, where secret psychotronic experiments are rumored to be conducted. Satanic ritual abuse cults are fairly common down there. Let us not forget the atrocities committed, covered up, then later talked about like they were heroes for doing it. He uttered the phrase of the conspiracy when asked if brain modulation can be done wirelessly. That's science fiction. Splitting personalities. I found many disinformation websites that had a list of the biggest hoaxes of the 20th century, listing much of what I am talking about here. One they mentioned was that multiple personality disorder doesn't exist. CIA-sponsored research on this topic has been going on for decades for the purposes of both to activate Manchurian candidates and to allow agents to infiltrate other countries' security agencies and still pass the lie detector tests about their loyalties and background through hypnosis and splitting personalities. The EEG heterodyning mind melding also allows control of the classic polygraph responses as well as the newer brain printing technologies in a much more precise and predictable manner. Polygraphs and courtroom processes need to be conducted in labs that are electromagnetically shielded, as well as having monitoring equipment for psychotronic signals interfering with the justice process. Finally, just a mention on how elements of the executive branch have stolen democracy from us. Because freedom of speech was granted to people in order to protect us from military coups and tyranny, they bypass this right by flooding the mass media and internet with noise and disinformation to the point that one's message cannot be heard, a clever way to rationalize destroying this important safeguard of democracy. Short of silencing everyone and protests through licenses and permits to congregate publicly, they have done the equivalent of blasting rock music and white noise at public speaking events so nobody can hear the truth through media control and flooding the internet with disinformation. Orwellian pranks. Continuing the tradition that George Orwell began, the military found that the UFO/evil alien cover story for abduction and experimentation on random citizens still works. It appears from the stored database of brain signals that they may be preparing for another mass-scale Orwellian prank of an alien takeover. After being given a demonstration, I assure you that most people will believe it. Boo, spooks are scaring you. Let me scare you as a demonstration of how the government has used and created terrorism for justifying a shadow fascist government to acquire funding and power. Flares dropped from airplanes flying across the United States in less than 5 hours would cause multi-million dollars in damage during the dry months. Stadiums filled with sports fanatics could be tear-gassed and machine guns utilized at their exits. Cannons or catapults could be used against dams, like the Hoover, to drown towns downstream, and the jaws of life could be used to bend railroad tracks to interrupt supply chains across the country. These simple methods could cause enormous fear and damage instituted by a group smaller than 100 organized people and less than $100,000 of financing. Let's continue the frightening scenario in order to show you that terrorists are anywhere to be found and bent on destroying the United States, but the militant government is. If you wanted to take out airplanes, you could blind the pilots taking off or use homemade rockets to hit the intakes of the engines. Even releasing a flock of birds has downed aircraft by them getting caught in the turbines. As described to me by agents, garage door electrical engines could be used to cause a surge in the electrical power grid, disabling power to large portions of the population. A denial of service attack could be instituted with an overriding radio and TV broadcast to influence the public. These are minor inconveniences. Let's look how individuals and the economy can be influenced. The wine industry could be destroyed by introducing the sharpshooter beetle or a fungus into Napa Valley fields. Known bacteria or chemicals in the drinking water reservoirs would taint the water supply for years. The mad cow disease could be easily introduced into the unprotected meat supply, as was covered up recently by the FDA. The economy could crash through loss of trust. Simply a demonstration of how mind reading can be done, or bugging abilities that these elements use to further increase their revenues for black ops projects that need not be overseen by Congress is an example. Placing hits on the top executives of Fortune 500 company executives would be another easy way to manipulate the stock market to fund these black ops projects. Every system in our society is fragile, and the recklessness of the torturing and killing of thousands cannot go without consequences, whether recognized or not. These chuckleheads in the government are even torturing an ex-biological weapons specialist. What could be the purpose of all these attacks? Think about all the traditional torture our government is doing to Iraqis. Do you think this will be forgiven and forgotten in one generation? Torture is a stupid strategy. Are these simple terrorist acts being committed? No, for obvious reasons. Stop letting the government control your fear and hold them accountable for the tens of thousands of victims worldwide for radio frequency directed energy torture. The facade government needs to try diplomacy and apologize for the shadow government's F__KUPS, and compensate people worldwide for their nervous system weapons, drug, and radiation experiments. False advertising. The various agencies and people competing for bigger budgets has always used the same tactics of deception to justify their funding to Congress and others. They lie about the current state of Russian technology. They always make the claim that the Russians are ahead in some technology and they need deep pockets and no restrictive oversight of projects in order to catch up. They really played this up with electromagnetic mind control technologies and directed energy weapons. Just as fear works with the public, Congress responds to it too. Question authority. Some fall by virtue, others rise by sin. Shakespeare. Would you trust a hungry man with your food, a promiscuous man with your wife or daughter, a greedy man with your money, a drug addict with your prescriptions, or a power-seeking man with authority? Question authority. Secrecy is the mechanism that allows the power addicts to further their addiction at the expense of the community. Why do the NATO countries have the illusion of freedom with fascism behind it, a facade government and a shadow government? It can best be illustrated with a child. If you want the child to rake the leaves in the yard, you could order him and pay him to do the task. He/she will begrudgingly do it and call it a chore. We have traditionally been taught to think of this approach as communism or dictatorship. But, if you allow the child the privilege to rake the leaves in the pile so he and his friends can jump and play in the pile, he/she is grateful and will do it for free. It is the illusion of choices and freedom that can increase productivity of the military/industry complex. Similarly, if a country were to draft people into an army like in Vietnam, people begrudgingly do it. They will fight half-heartedly. Give them an imaginary ideal where they are willing to die for their principle and cause, they will sign up and fight righteously. It is this layer of lies that has given the United States an edge over other forms of government in order to control and motivate the minds of the masses more efficiently. This method of rule turns out to be a double-edged sword. It relies heavily on the ability to control information streams so that the illusion doesn't come crashing down. The backlash of a population, who believed they were free, will also be willing to overthrow a fascist shadow government just as fervently if the knowledge reached critical mass. Simply the lies needed to discount everyone as crazy would start falling apart as people became more aware of the cover-ups. This is their Achilles heel. Knowledge is power, and an informational civil war is how they can be destroyed. Where is the Soviet Union in their research? While the United States swindlers have traditionally pointed the finger at the Russians and used false and exaggerated reports of their progress to get rapid and large budget approval to stay ahead, remote e.g. heterodyning weapons are probably the worst example of this common practice. An obvious sign of who developed the global capability first, was the collapse of the Soviet Union economically. The country who possesses this weapon would easily be capable of manipulating all economic markets and funding their continued programs. One could easily destroy other countries' economies using similar manipulations. This simple event is ample proof of who developed the capability first, and who is responsible for the worldwide torture and murder of thousands. I'll give you a hint, it isn't Russia. A while back when I was interviewing at Morgan Stanley's proprietary trading and statistical arbitrage division, I had an epiphany. The fast money is made on short-term trading imbalances in value called arbitrage opportunities. Computer models use statistical methods to data mine probabilistic aberrations in pricing that should exist as short as a few seconds. The technique performs quite well, although the field is getting more competitive. All monetary exchanges really come down to demand due to perceived value. If one had access to the personality profiles and brain models from the CIA database, one could develop an accurate simulation of overall market reaction and influence of big players given different probabilistic information scenarios. Big money can be made using psychological profiling of the irrational market fluctuations. It is beyond the scope of this book to detail the mathematical modeling of this kind of system. But I wanted to point out how the same technology used to predict how the United States population will react to various information, be it truth or lies, leaked to the press or spoken by the president, could be used legitimately to fund private wars or projects that would need no congressional oversight. Now, of course, throw in mind reading, influence, and other surveillance, the task becomes incredibly easy. Even the CIA doesn't need to funnel crack cocaine into LA neighborhoods to fund their third world rebellions. There had to be a second reason that the CIA was distributing crack in black neighborhoods in LA other than to raise money for the Contras. They could have easily raised the money through white-collar crimes far faster than selling drugs like the investigations have indicated. With their surveillance and spying techniques despite EEG cloning, they could have raised the money in the stock or options markets like terrorists have done with predictions of future events they cause. It was not about the money. Fear is control. Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is to be a slave. Replicant Batty. Blade Runner. During my torture, I began to think about why terrorists are created. The absurdity of the inconvenience due to airport security is a perfect example how irrational people behave. Airline travel statistically is the safest in the world, even including 9/11 events. I came up with over 50 ways to bypass airport security and take over a plane with current standards. People don't think through possibilities rationally. I won't publish the other 49 ways, but I need to give at least one example how an airplane can be taken out if that were the goal. As a reminder, if the object were to kill as many Americans as possible like the government would like you to believe, a guy with an Uzi at a sporting stadium or hospital would easily fare better. The fear is caused by the government propaganda of events. The militant government benefits historical from your fear. They are the ones putting terror in you with their useless color alert status warnings. One example is that only metals are scanned for in airport scanners. Plastic explosives can be molded into the casing of any commercial-looking object and carried through airport scanners. This is a well-known fact. The detonation device could be as small as a wristwatch. This is not rocket science. If someone with only a high school education wanted to take down a plane, it would not take more than a week to execute. The control of the population through fear is so obvious to those of us in the know. How do we wake the masses up to history repeating itself? Ghost busting, baiting the weapons testers. It is merely speculation as to why the traitorous CIA/DOD weapons testers choose most of the people that they do. Everyone asks, why me? I'm nobody. That may be exactly one of the criteria. One rough breakdown of the people targeted by the weapon is, 70% random selection, 5% government whistleblowers, 5% outspoken liberal activists, 10% DOD scientists who worked on secret technologies, 10% lifestyle choices, 1% appear to be real targets like Saddam Hussein. So one method that one undercover American hero might use to bait the shadow government is by taking a combination of L-DOPA and serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which would increase neurotransmitter secretion or their reuptake and thereby would make them more psychic temporarily. Since it appears like they try to find brains that are responsive to a low power level, this might be a method to bait them. L-DOPA, a synthetic dopamine neurotransmitter analog, would increase synaptic activity and thereby amplify any reception of small radio/microwave/magnetic/electric informationally coherent signals. The excess neurotransmitter in the synaptic junctions helps amplify any precise external modulation of neurotransmitter release. At high frequency pulsed modulated with extremely low frequencies representing neuronal connections, one will find several energy and information transfer mechanisms. Sony has patents using ultrasonic energy transfer into brain tissue for future virtual reality video gaming. That's a different method but effective. The undercover hero would be a very appealing subject for the weapons testers due to the ability to discredit him/her thinking that they were natural psychotics and view them as someone who has gone beyond the allowable threshold of sensitivity. Perhaps there is a Tempest threshold for human brains. I can only speculate as to why there appears to be a threshold. Perhaps psychic spies use it and everyone who goes beyond it, the United States views as a potential threat. It may be that that person begins to pick up on EEG heterodyning signals meant for other people and would be considered a threat. That is only speculation though as to the motives behind it. There may in fact be no threshold that is searched for, and simply directed focused energy can compensate for different natural energy amplification levels. AD and Ritalin. I am only speculating here about the increased need for Ritalin due to AD in children. I do not have any proof of this yet. But the training of the psychic army, or mind controllers, has stepped up its intensity about every 4 years, probably in accordance with budget increases. No one is exempt from being selected, including children and the elderly. One of the bad side effects of being in a hive mind and remote neurally linked is attention deficit disorder, AD. The number of children put on Ritalin has escalated in correlation with the growing army. There is evidence that stimulants like Ritalin change the amplification of external stimuli in the brain and alter the brain's neurochemistry sufficiently to break an EEG cloning lock. The new brain waves would need to be remapped to create a more effective lock-on. Usually the mapping process just occurs at the beginning of a project and is not revisited later. EEG cloning is most effective on subjects that are sensory deprived. Stimulants, like caffeine, act to increase the amplification of sensory stimuli and thereby diminish the influence of the electromagnetic signals relative to internal and sensory brain signals. Another speculation I have with regards to stimulants increasing or decreasing the effectiveness of EEG heterodyning weapons, is the Air Force has been experimenting with stimulants on their fighter pilots. There have been a couple of reported cases where a fighter pilot was given an amphetamine drink before combat. They accidentally fired on allies. Could this have been a test to see if errors of judgment through EEG heterodyning could be defeated through stimulants? It is a mad world. To give you an idea how widespread this testing might be, I will give a few possible outbreaks in recent years that should be alarming if related to this weapon. Panic attacks that so many people have been hospitalized for may be a silent remote-controlled heart attack attempt on their lives. The DOT is collecting kill probability ratios. Bad dreams where you wake up with your heart pounding out of your chest may have been a practice attempt. Who knows, maybe sudden infant death, SIDS, is related to these random kill attempts. Women and children are drawn from the death lottery equally as men. Songs that you can't get out of your head that repeat over and over may be an attempt at EEG synchronization. Just remember, you let the United States DOD/CIA become out of control and rogue through your silence and inactivism. Abort mission safety failover. My friend and I, who is not a CIA agent, he adamantly declares, although he travels with the head NSA guy and Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security on vacation, used to discuss behavior modification philosophy extensively before I became a target for a Manchurian candidate using biocommunication MCULTRA programming. He postulated that if there existed a pain pill that someone could take, it may have an addictive quality to it. He surmised that if someone is medicated with pain for a duration, that the brain adapts to that state, and that if they were to stop taking it, they would get high on life. Ironically, that is true for soft torture. It is like a workout with a rush after being tortured for days in a row. So to abort the targets being tortured now, the shadow government, if they had to pull the plug on all those thousands of projects because civil war was about to break out, could just stop the pain and killing signals. Those people would suddenly feel relaxed, slightly brain dead from the lack of overstimulation, and become complacent and blissfully stupid. A good fallback just in case. But that would not be a successfully tested kill weapon, so they wouldn't do it. The oxymoron of intelligence agencies. One thing I noticed throughout life is that companies advertise what they lack. They are trying to change the known stereotypes. Intelligence agencies are no different. I attended the best American schools in the country, and the CIA would try to recruit at them, but it is thought that if you have to go that route that you are a loser and couldn't get a job anywhere else. I am happy to report that my years at the Ivies, they have had 0% success. The DOD, Department of Defense, has gotten so desperate for some intelligence that they are resorting to extortion at Harvard, threatening to cut off research grant money if they don't get a prestigious slot in the recruiting lineup. Pretty pathetic, isn't it? My fellow UK/US/NATO scientists that have been killed by bizarre suicides would agree with the lack of intelligence in the so-called intelligence communities. Just to give you an idea of the geniuses working at the Pentagon and sub-intelligence agencies in the joint NATO forces in control of these psychotronic weapons, international policy and military strategy in the UK, for example, I'll refrain from the United States example. They forced the private satellite imaging companies to remove images of all their secret bases. By doing that, they highlighted where they all were, simply by doing a difference between older images and images at different resolutions. So a guy published a website called uksecretbases.com. He has been shut down since, but a web archive probably still has it cached. I don't know if my knowledge of NATO's secret naval headquarters was the reason for my psychotronic attacks or rediscovery of their ever so coveted mind control technologies. The DoD is experiencing such a shortage of intellectual capital that they have resorted to extortion in order to recruit at Harvard. They threatened to take away $500 million in research grants if they weren't allowed to recruit on campus. The criminals won this round and were allowed on campus. No other recruiters torture and kill those that they recruit when they leave the organization. Pulsing microwave voices. Like with animation where different still frames are shown one after the other, our brains interpolate the images and perceive the difference as motion. If visual frames are presented faster than 30 times a second, we cannot even perceive the discontinuity. We see monitors flicker due to the refresh and scanning method. The mind perceives the understood images as smooth. Sound impressions in the microwave hearing effect seem to have a similar phenomenon occurring. With sound impressions which occur at roughly 10 times a second, the mind will perceive the sound impressions as continuous. This is for microwave pulsed sound perception, not sound pressure waves. Back to school for psychiatrists. One simple way to differentiate government EEG heterodyning experiments and natural schizophrenia is by the conversational content, if they hear voices. One limitation of the software that non-lethal directed energy weapons are working to perfect is that it requires full sentences for its training set. Most people do not think in full sentences, nor would a dopamine-amplified brain perceive full sentence, coherent speech. When natural schizophrenics hear voices, it is a mumble and usual just a few phrases or words, as their word pattern matchers misfire due to being too close to the threshold. Background sounds are almost always necessary to trigger the words or phrases that they perceive. This is a very different phenomenon than what the thousands of victims of brutal EEG cloning weapons testing experience. They hear the voice of God through synthetic telepathy, radio frequency modulation of neurotransmitter release at the synaptic connections with real subhumans on the other end of the brain link, as clear as a telephone conversation, if not better 24/7, requiring that they speak in full sentences. While the fake government-sponsored satanic cults and other cover stories are meant to copycat well-known headliners' psychotic symptoms, there are still many important flaws in their imperfect illusion that those skilled and studied can quickly identify and distinguish between the groups. I researched the FBI's 350 most watched terrorist organizations. Not one was the very famous New World Order psycho-terrorist organization, nor was there a single satanic cult listed, even though both are thoroughly written about and even the San Diego police are aware of satanic ritual abuse. This is a puzzle, isn't it? The satanic cults are just training camps for the United States assassin squads. It pumps these psychos up and helps create the skewed psychology necessary for their tradition of earning a welfare check by torturing and killing. The FCC's real role is in censorship of politics. The FCC is another small manifestation of fascism. It is not an elected group of people and arbitrarily applies rules with an agenda behind it. As any radio show will tell you, they are based more on political content than on words they forgot to bleep. It is a way to signal the understood threat. This is how media in general is controlled without overt threats from the shadow controllers. Here is the dichotomy of the political split personality, the two-headed monster. The overt statement to the timid public is that certain dirty words and pictures of ugly naked humans will ruin our society. We must censor these things. But pictures of naked Iraqis being tortured and humiliated, that's just good fun. Similarly, the government is very interested in getting search engines to hand over their search databases to find pedophiles. But rapes by prison guards or the thousands of murders that are unsolved apparently takes less priority. It wouldn't be to track information flow to stop the spread of knowledge about the illegal government activities, would it? I must clarify that when people talk about a shadow government, they are referring to the unconstitutional and illegal methods of influence to direct public political opinions, to hide treasonous tortures of individuals, and to cover up assassinations with plausible denial. The shadow government doesn't govern anything at all. They instigate violence and war, cover up leaks, and try to sway mass public opinion, such as was done by the 9/11 event, in order to get everyone behind a Middle Eastern invasion. I assure you that the events of 9/11 have a very well-tracked history right back to the CIA. Misdirection of anger, the most used tactic to instigate violence. Mind control and psychological manipulation is a pure science now. As I mentioned before, I was told by a passerby, "You are a psychopath," twice in 1 week before my torture began. They came very close to creating a psychopath through the prolonged abuse and their misdirection of anger tactics. They are trying to create more terrorism in this country and every other one using these weapons and tactics of mind manipulation. The CIA mind control research dates back many decades. They particularly had an interest in splitting personalities. This research is obviously useful in creating Manchurian candidates and helping double agents climb the ranks in other countries. I find it most interesting that they have done it to an entire government. They found in their research that the more polarized the actions and voiced opinions of the facade versus the shadow government become, the less likely people will notice the gross hypocrisy. They are able to continue to operate in this extreme way simply because people find it too difficult to believe, for example, that the President of the United States can ask China to be nicer to its people while his cronies are torturing thousands if not tens of thousands worldwide, probably justified as electromagnetic directed energy practice targets. This is the game and how it has been done since Kennedy's assassination.
The end of the United States shadow government's satanic ritual abuse. The mind control experimenters and psychic assassins were given 1 year to experiment and kill me. They said to me in the last week before the 1-year anniversary of Halloween that they had screwed up badly. I was supposed to die. While I did manage to dodge each attempt on my life and prevent harm to others, they easily stole 35 years of my health and longevity, not to mention my happiness. I know this is irresponsible to say, but if I knew what they were going to put me through in the beginning, I would have ended it like many other victims have done and taken away the data and practice that they were seeking. So writing this book exposing the people, the technologies, their tactics, and helping others plan a strategy for taking out their weapons systems to defend themselves helps me heal. You are lost in the matrix of lies. Like in the movie The Matrix, people are so ignorant about these decades-old weapons which seem so science fiction-like, that they are not willing to help targeted people, nor can they comprehend the pure evil that their tax dollars support. And since most people have no experience or practice with neural influencing technologies, they could be used at any time against a victim through EEG heterodyning. Most people have been tamed and dulled into captivity like a broken horse. The illusion of freedom is good enough now, and the self-reassuring bullshit that we mindlessly chant in our national anthem, "The land of the free and home of the brave," quells our subconscious insecurities of it not being true. It is as if all the people of this country have been subdued into complacency and compliance with electromagnetic Prozac, hypnotube sleight of hand misdirection, and information overload shutdown. Experiments described by scientists working in the field say that at 5 frequency modes the induced brain impulses and voices sound synthetic and their mind feels the induced neural influences, but at 12 modes or higher the subject can't perceive the influence and mistakes the modulated voice as their own thoughts. The Russian woodpecker transmitters have 12 modes according to Dr. Bird. But the United States agents brag that the United States has the only global mind network. People appear on the War Room global grid as one of the 1,000 points of light. I am one of the few people who have been released from the psychotronic torture concentration camps in such a short time. Most endure many years of torture under the weapon. I still fight for a reconstruction of America back to constitutional values and transparency in government. I get asked to be an expert witness at least once a week by someone suing the government for this kind of abuse, false imprisonment, or death of a family member. There have been so many attempts at a class action lawsuit, but all have failed. It usually takes 20 years for the government to release the documents validating what victims of other experiments in history tried to get the public to recognize while they were alive. This is an informational war, no bombs, and no missiles. Even the hacking of the human mind is classified as an information weapon. I met with one ex-CIA agent who is fighting the shadow government. He never told me why, whether he was a torture experiment. He had bodyguards with him when we met. Clearly, he knows how corrupt the agency is. The ex-FBI agents and other ex-government agents were cautious in different ways. I was tortured to the brink of death many times, and like in the movie V is for Vendetta, I quit fearing death. They already killed me. So we share signal intelligence data which different groups have been analyzing while trying to reverse engineer the nervous system disrupting weapons and find a worldwide cure to disable them. Ideally we would like to show by introducing a vaccine what idiots the militants in charge of these various classifications of weapons are. We need to knock out their surveillance capabilities and nervous system influence, then break through the information gridlock using creative means. The $100 billion weapon system could be rendered useless. That is our immediate goal, since justice is a long way off and waking up the population from their hypnotic dream has proved impossible given the complete control of the information streams. If you are reading this book, you most likely had to get it directly from the source, or in order for a mainstream publisher to accept it I had to publish it as fiction. I openly lecture around the country on these weapons whose forums are free and open to the public. If you have interest, network yourself in and come to one of the monthly gathering. There are groups everywhere in the world. The protocols of the hypocrisy. So, in these approved torture and kill statistical experiments they must follow strict protocols. As strange as it might seem, they can try to kill anyone in the world or make that target kill other people using information weapons in addition to gaslighting through stalking, but they cannot chemically poison, shoot, or assassinate the subject using conventional methods. I assume it would bias their efficacy data. Saddam was a pawn used to justify invasion. We cannot gloss over the important testimony from Saddam Hussein as reported by USA Today newspaper in 1992. The important deduction to make from his statement that the CIA tried to kill him by inducing a heart attack and a stroke is that he was assaulted by the Satan system, which means he was EEG heterodyned. He is tracked anywhere in the world. They should not have had any trouble finding him. But they did. They would also have done a mind meld and known ahead of time either where the weapons of mass destruction were or that Iraq didn't have any. This is proof that the weapons of mass destruction argument of invasion was a lie. Tony Blair of the UK said that one of his scientists said that there were weapons of mass destruction. That scientist came forward and denied what Tony Blair said. The scientist ended up dead from a bizarre suicide a week later. The web of lies pile many layers deep. Now the funny part. Satan was used on me, and the remote heart attack and stroke sensations were a major part of the experimentation I endured for a year. I am in good health and wasn't too concerned about a stroke. It was difficult to tell if they could actually cause vasoconstriction and increase my blood pressure or if it was another EEG heterodyne hoax. The Army has published documents we hold that show that they mapped out the sensory pathways of the brain completely. My EEG cloner told me that they bend over, causing the blood to rush to their heads, and in addition put pressure on their heads with their hands or a tight baseball cap, and because I feel everything that they do, it feels like they are causing a pressure build-up in my head. They said that they pedaled on a standing bicycle to increase their heart rates, which would increase my heart rate slightly, but it would feel like my heart was pounding out of my chest because our sensory perceptions were linked or cloned. I would take my pulse, but it wouldn't feel all that unusual. So it is difficult to say if they were trying to assassinate Saddam or just make him panic, which allows them to gain more control, and since people think of the evilest things they are going to do in revenge when tortured, it was a way to understand his possible capabilities. This would not only provoke Saddam, which partially led us to the current war, but allowed them to know in his angriest moment what he was planning to do or now provoked to do. Incredible, isn't it, how criminal, careless, and stupid the CIA and MI5 are? Tens of billions of dollars in war, thousands of lives lost, and many thousands more psychotronically tortured daily worldwide and traditionally tortured in Iraq. 35 million people have died due to the secrecy since EEG heterodyning was discovered that it could have saved. They have to keep it a secret now because the atrocities, stupidity, and treasonous crimes under the Constitution have reached epic proportions that people would lose all faith in our leaders' abilities to govern wisely if it were widely known. We are in the darkest period of American and human history, but secrecy and ignorance keeps it vastly unknown. Appeal to Port Goss, current CIA Director. Porter, do you remember your time at Hotchkiss, where your values were shaped? Do you remember when the headmaster would appeal to the students who committed some out-of-control prank to do the honorable thing and come forward and take responsibility for what they had done? Americans are appealing to you to come forward, be an honorable man again, and tell the public what is being done to them. This is too important. It is not the time to lie, maintain secrets, or to hide. This is what will define you as a man and your legacy. 2 worlds and 2 lies. There are 2 different worlds, each has some truth and a lot of deception. Which one is the Matrix virtual world? The electromagnetic mind control world is obviously composed of signals that feel as real as the ones from physical sensory stimuli. It reveals the truth about the psychological and informational deception matrix in the physical realm, and its sets of controls become obvious. From that matrix of deception one can view those in the mind network as deceived by the virtual pain and panic, controlled by electromagnetic pulses of energy in the brain. Unfortunately, neither perspective is pure or even close to the one all-encompassing, unwavering truth. We as a species, for better or for worse, have unthinkingly taken the evolutionary path towards inner space, towards a virtual subjective experience with each piece specialized for an objective function of a machine, disconnected and not representative of what our race valued or hoped to become, which I believe is for each person to be fully aware, connected, and an important part of each and every decision affecting their happiness, well-being, and future. At the minimum, we hope we can trust each other and to look out for each other if we don't participate in those decisions. Also, not the case. Secrecy is our undoing. More brains are not better than one. Another problem with living in a heterodyned hive mind is that when any one of the collective eats everyone else, if they are talking, bites their tongue. The strong impulse for the jaw to clasp down from the masticator is cloned onto the other people. This is quite an annoying problem for everyone to have to synchronize their eating habits in order to avoid this. Stupid alien pranks. The naively patriotic tax batteries need to take heed at other plots that were revealed to me through synthetic telepathy. The CIA Satan practitioners told me that they had planned to mind control over 100 people to leave their gas stoves on in various neighborhoods to level several city blocks and make it look like an orchestrated terrorist act, but they were called off. I suppose this isn't quite as bad as provoking a war or creating suicide terrorist bombers to crash planes into the World Trade Towers. The alien pranks are getting out of hand. The death machine. Obviously, I wish I had gotten the kindly God mind control manipulation scripts when they introduced themselves with the many options between Borga, magical dwarfs, angels, God, aliens, cult, Russians, or Chinese. The United States is the most brutal, barbaric country in the world bar none. 35 million people have died from the secrecy of just one aspect of this technology alone, add another 30 million killed by the United States in all the previous wars, and no country comes close to the death machine that we've created. Inside the minds of monsters. Let's walk a mile in their brain waves. Why do humans become corrupted by power? They may start out thinking they are honorable and doing their duty, but the power corrupts in the end. Since we are all very similar to begin with, it means that we too would probably be corrupted in their shoes. If we can understand how this mind virus spreads, we can cure mankind of this ill. Distinguishing between national defense strategists and truly grotesque and deformed minds can be difficult and may be pointless. One only needs to study the Nazi Reich and methods of psychological and informational controls to understand our own militant government since 1945. Hitler's catchphrase was to purify and create a super race. Ours is to bring democracy, a superior form of government, and the illusion of freedom to countries around the world. For Russia, it is probably similar in rationality. It is still fascism in 3 different forms and under 3 different names and flags. War is the illness. Power and control are the temptation. Greed and fame are the drivers. Honor and duty are the secondary level of skewed rationality and method of controls. Thoughtless obedience and conformity makes up the third. Welcome to the Third Reich and the final solution. There have been many architects of the matrices of deceptions. Other books go into their personal values and lives, and most have Nazi connections. We must ensure that power is not taken by the military industry complex, whether sought or unsought. President and General Eisenhower. Military coup d'état. Hypothetically, if you were addicted to power and control and were able to rationalize your addiction by saying to yourself, I know what this society needs and how to protect them from themselves for the good of America's military might in the world, how would you go about gaining more control and power? You would play off of society's fears. You would have a Cold War with a nuclear threat with Russia. You would create or allow acts of terrorism, the term for guerrilla warfare that has been rebranded. If we translated it back, we have absurdly declared war on war. The people would allow huge concessions of their privacy and autonomy for the artificial sense of security and safety. You could rationalize all sorts of creative interpretations of existing laws, and create many more secret laws to justify your actions in the name of security. Lying to the public to create an artificial sense of freedom and choices is done easily enough with the psychological methods that have been thoroughly developed by several agencies. Control the points of influence in a society, the few people and companies that shape popular opinion, and the herd mentality of the rest of the flock will follow. Now, imagine you had a mind control weapon in your possession that could be used to silence objectors and control those points of influence. Would you use it? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. This is the grim situation we face today. To show how short-sighted and ignorant the public has become at large, I will give an absurd example similar to events that have transpired. I want to be elected president. I promise that if I'm elected, I will give 1 year tax-free to everyone. Is this bribery? Am I buying votes with a country credit card? Many people would vote for me. If I wanted more power to control world events for profit or satisfy my need for power, I could instill a fear in all Americans, whether real or imaginary. For example, I could say that the world's oil supply is being poisoned by the Arabs, where much of it comes. They are placing micro-devices in the million of barrels shipped to the United States that will generate a spark at random times, causing them to ignite the fuel. They are nearly too small to easily detect, and every airplane, car, refinery, and military vehicle will be turned into a bomb. The economy will be shut down and America will be ruined. We must invade these countries to stop them. I could stage a couple of random explosions at gas stations to validate these beliefs. Then I would be granted more power under war laws. I would be given bigger military budgets to control, etc., etc. It is pretty easy to control public opinion since we are reactionary and don't dive deeper into political motives and strategies. Timeline of takeover. While I was able to trace back remote bioelectromagnetic mind reading and influencing experiments on the masses to 1976, the technology is actually much older than that when viewed through the media programming of the masses. Aliens, psychic control, and synthetic telepathy appeared on TV frequently in the popular show called The Outer Limits. These were produced and aired in 1963, the same year that Kennedy was assassinated. Kennedy gave a speech at Columbia University 10 days before he was shot. At that event he alluded to an ominous conspiracy and said that he must alert the American people. The high office of the president has been used to foment a plot to destroy America's freedom, and before I leave this office, I must inform the citizens of their plight. John F. Kennedy. Statement made at Columbia University, November 12, 1963. I have never followed so-called conspiracy theory and never had much of an interest in politics in general. But being so brutally tortured and then discovering that there is no way to break the information to the masses like thousands of others have found out, you realize that we really lost our freedom a long time ago due to this technology. My torturers proudly confessed that they were behind the Kennedy assassination and other political manipulation. For example, they mentioned several times that Michael Dukakis's run for presidency was targeted. Strange confession. How did Kennedy find out about the mind control radar and plot to control every human brain on the planet with these giant ionospheric heater-phased arrays? I believe his generals had to tell him because of the Bay of Pigs fiasco. Why were nuclear missiles that close to the United States such a threat? They had no way at the time to stop missiles from the other directions anyway. It was because Russia knew where the United States built its first over-the-horizon radar system. It was stationed in Puerto Rico and completed in 1959. By placing the radar system outside of the continental the United States at more than a 20-degree angle from zenith, the radar system bounces its signals off the ionosphere and can observe the continental the United States. For what purpose? The Russians got the same mind-reading and influencing research from the Nazi scientists, so they knew what it was for. They had to explain to President Kennedy that the Russians had placed nuclear missiles in Cuba because it is within the 20 degrees of zenith and out of the range of the radar system. It was too close. The obvious question to ask is, why would you build the radar system outside of the United States? Kennedy was rightfully and obviously very disturbed by this plot to spy and control the United States citizens through their brains' electrical activity, and being one of the last great presidents with honor and integrity this country has had, he was going to inform the people that the country has been taken over by a military coup. Since then the power-addicted idiots have plugged the hole and built many large phased arrays in Colorado, Alaska, Massachusetts, and Brazil, to name just a few. The countdown. As with all past massive human experimentation involving biological weapons, assignations, radiation, or other trials, a cooling down period is required before discovery and reporting. The lifelong torture and mind control experiments are reaching the end of their project timeline. The Air Force and Directed Energy Directorate report that they will release the information about these human trials in 25 years. That means in another 5 to 10 years they will stop them so that the victims will die off and there will be fewer citizens that will be demanding compensation. Currently, if they had to pay out $1 million to each victim, it would cost the United States easily $10 billion. It is simply a matter of economics that human effects weapon testing is done this way. Cognitive modeling and the timeline for takeover. This biocommunications weapon came over with the Nazi scientists in 1945. President Truman signs the National Security Act of 1947 to create the CIA. The CIA begins a long streak of crimes against citizens of the world, and they continue the horrific Nazi agenda of world domination, all based on this new biofield modulation discovery. The cataloging and cloning operations of minds has never slowed down, grabbing hundreds or thousands of new minds each year, at least reported by those who figure it out. The Russians were infected with the Nazi ideals as well from their share of Nazi scientists who gave them the technology after World War II. In 1960 the United States was put under an ionospheric heater surveillance grid and the mind system fully working. 1976, the system Tammy was born, followed by Satan. In 1990s HARP came online with even greater capabilities for putting more of the world under ionospheric heating surveillance and biocommunication control, nearly completing the global human surveillance grid. See points of weakness in the grid. We can estimate the current effectiveness of the mind-influencing weapons based on this timeline. We do it as follows. 1. Assuming that they were intelligent about how they collected their cognitive modeling data, they would have grabbed people that fell in the middle of normal cognitive abilities first, since that would be the lowest hanging fruit. Cognitive models with all their differences still have a bell curve distribution from some average model. 2. Assume that the development began in 1947 and will end in 2030 as per the Air Force scientists' statements to disclose the weapon to the public. That would be 83 years of cognitive modeling and collection. Let's also assume that the collection rate is uniform across the timeline, although it looks like it has been stepped up in the most recent decade. 3. We will make the assumption that the weapon needs to be 95% effective on any person or population as the end goal before disclosure or complete takeover. So at 2 sigma and further away from the normal or average, people will be immune to different cognitive mapping effects and a threat to the Nazi weapon to some varying degree. Also, we can conclude that at the writing of this book, 2006, the DOD/CIA/Nazis have mapped 2006 to 1947, 2030 to 1947, smiley face, 71.1% of the bell curve on both directions. Since the mapping of one person or feature of a mind works on the entire population represented by the area under the curve, and being 71.1% complete in terms of the timeline means that the weapon is already at 1.42 sigma efficacy, or roughly 88% of the population or cognitive features of humankind. This estimate is truly frightening. The Nazis might have lost the Battle of World War II, but they may end up winning the war. Let's calculate the lower bounds of the weapon's efficacy. Let's make the assumption that entire minds need to be mapped and that they aren't transferable in terms of their features. That still means that 71.1% of the population has been automatically mapped based on the Directed Energy Weapons Directorate timelines, and assuming that there is no cooling off period for all the people who suffered and died from the weapons practice and testing. We can only hope that they need this mental crutch for their thinking and the machine didn't efficiently collect the cognitive data samples based on this paradigm. Putting it in perspective. So the chances of you being abducted and tortured by the government physically or psychotronically is about 1,000 out of 300 million each year if you are American. So that is a 1 in 4,000 chance in a lifetime if there are 75,000 victims, which doesn't include all the collateral damage of relatives, friends, strangers, and businesses affected. That's much better than winning the lottery. That is twice the possibility of having a parachute failure while skydiving. That's 1/40th the chance of developing schizophrenia from natural causes. That is why it's easy to lump psychotronic test victims in that category. It is 12 times more likely than a shark attack, but half as likely as being killed by lightning. If 3,000 people died in the 9/11 attacks, you have a 10 times greater chance of being brutalized by the United States government than being, in comparison, humanely and instantly killed by a foreign terrorist organization in the 30-year history of these secret test programs. Who should you really be afraid of? This statistic only includes psychotronic and directed energy weapons testing. It does not include the biological warfare, drug, or radiation testing they have performed in the past on citizens. These people performing these horrific experiments are the enemy within. Everyone else in the government are just unwitting participants. Most soldiers never know the real reasons that they are fighting to the death, and the public in accordance are just fed the simple reasons to support government actions. It has always been a game of redirecting anger at all the wrong people and covering up their own errors and selfish goals. Random selection of test subjects satiates the data gatherer's sense of twisted justice, for whom will be thrust into the virtual hell of dissection of their soul. There is nothing you can do to stop it if your social security number is drawn. You could pressure your political leaders to demand an independent investigation and to pass laws now, because once it happens to you, do not expect anyone to help you. You will be systematically discredited. Your fate will be sealed. What you don't know can hurt you. There is still time to stop the most abominable weapon ever conceived by humankind. They are still perfecting the artificial intelligence software for automated torture and sentence stimulation that imprisons your thought possibilities through brain entrainments apart from forced EEG heterodyning with some psychic moron. The echelon network for policing thoughts is incomplete and doesn't work on everyone. There are only about 200 so-called psychics, jumping around EEG heterodyning and spying into minds, so there is only a 200 out of 300 million probability that you are being spied on using this technology. Ever get that feeling you are being watched? No one ever thinks it can be done through their own eyes. George Orwell's 1984 didn't see this coming. Too bad there are not more honorable men and women willing to break the code of secrecy to allow the most important open debate in human history on the future of these weapons and uses of the technology to occur. It has far-reaching implications on religion, on how we define ourselves as a species, and on social interactions and organizations. We need the collective intelligence of the world to decide the fate of the species, because I assure you, the crippled minds that currently control the technology will not find a universally optimal use for it. The Black Sciences. Double toil and trouble, fire burn, and cauldron bubble. Shakespeare, Macbeth, Act 4, Scene I. As we begin our adventure, all that I promise you is a simpler, coherent model of historical events and of seemingly science fiction but real physics with far better explanatory and predictive power, all without using magic, demonic possessions, and poltergeists to explain it. Tear open the curtain of secrecy to reveal the small men playing God. Now we are off to see the wizard. Disbelief is the common reaction. How is it possible? Most people can't escape their erroneous intuitive sense of the world. Mathematics is the language of truth. As Richard Feynman said, if you aren't deeply disturbed by quantum mechanics, you clearly haven't understood it. Relativity theory is inconceivable to most as a truth about the laws of time and space in our universe. Similarly, people will have difficulties with superconductor Josephine sensors measuring a single quantum of energy, or that your mental experiences are completely contained in the electrical properties of the brain. Deciphering the brain code has been a primary research direction, the Holy Grail, for most neural scientists. And they are getting very close in the civilian world to completely deciphering it. To help the skeptic reader open their mind to unbelievable scientific realities, let me illustrate some well-documented feats of science. Would you have believed someone who said that a ball weighing a kilogram of an element could destroy an entire city before the nuclear bomb was demonstrated? If someone told you that a several-ton metal tube could lift itself 30,000 feet above sea level on its own propulsion before airplanes became common, would you have believed them? Would you believe someone who claimed that they could view individual atoms, if you hadn't heard of an electron tunneling microscope? If NASA didn't post images of quasars near the edge of the known universe, would you believe that one could see 9 billion light-years away, 53 trillion miles away? Some people are still in disbelief that humans have walked on the moon. Many people use mobile phones but have no idea how they work. Golf ball-sized objects are tracked from the ground in space orbit. Amateur microwave enthusiasts have bounced microwaves off the moon back to Earth, called Earth-Moon Earth, EM. Even teleportation technology is working at a quantum scale with a phenomenon called quantum entanglement. Scientific breakthroughs are always met with skepticism before the majority of the population has been exposed to the breakthrough. Wireless EEG cloning/heterodyning has been around for 30+ years, but the selfishness and stupidity of the scientists and military figures involved for not seeing a more important global beneficial optima for releasing this technology for medical, commercial, and other uses has stymied and hindered the collective intelligence of the population from developing it. It is currently valued more for its spying and controlling capabilities against Americans and foreign interests. Tammy, Mind, and Satan. While active denial of even the acronym Tempest, which is well known in the defense industry, is still in effect, it is the standard known to determine how much electromagnetic shielding is needed to thwart an attempt at reading the energy from monitors, TVs, or computers at a distance and reconstructing the information. This is the Tempest standard for military labs. Many have offered insight into what it might stand for. The best one I found is the electromagnetic probability estimates of safe thresholds for undetectability. These standards change with technology and guesstimates on what sensitivity other countries have implemented. More satellites or bigger dishes, the more stringent the Tempest standards need to be. MIND is the acronym for the top secret project of electromagnetic mind control. It stands for Magnetic Integrated Neuron Duplicator. This is just a fancy phrase that means EEG cloning. TAMI stands for Thought Amplifier and Mind Interface. It seems to be a second-generation system built on top of MIND. The acronym for the kill mode weaponized software of this technology is SATAN, Silent Assassination Through Amplified Neurons. While the CIA has a whole bag of tricks to menticize people, the drugs can leave a trace of metabolic residue or a signature of damage that they leave in the body and brain. So Satan has become the preferred method of silent assassination in the agencies with the best plausible denial rating. Mind magicians, mood mistros, and electronic illusionists. My interest as a child in magic sparked the interest which I have in physics, science, and psychology. Trying to understand how mental errors of assumptions could be induced in an audience by sleight-of-hand techniques and verbal cues was an astounding psychological trick to me. I loved solving the mysteries of every illusion and magic trick I have ever seen. This love of solving mysteries continued throughout my life. There are almost no black boxes left for me to understand. I have taken apart every appliance and machine ever made. Later in life, I wanted to understand the most complex pieces of machinery on the planet, humans. I have explored many fascinating minds from all walks of life and cultures on this planet except for one segment. Sociopathic, unquestioningly obedient, or Schadenfreude-diseased people have eluded me on how they are created. I generally try to rid myself of negative people in my life. So this knowledge is something I did not seek, it found me. Sociopaths occur both naturally from childhood traumas, genetics, or life experiences affecting people in unpredictable ways. Of interest to the CIA and some military divisions with assassins is how to create them. How can a Manchurian candidate or programmed assassin be created is the question the Gultram mind control experiments help answer. There have been many books written by survivors and experts in this area that I list in the appendix, so I won't go into every detail of the program that continues to this day. The basic steps that they use in the extreme can be experienced in milder forms such as boot camp in the military or cults. The only new twist to these horrific acts of experimentation and brutality to children and others destined by the corrupt elements in the government to perform programmed assassinations on command is that the Gultra programming can now be done completely wirelessly using TAMI, and various neural programming techniques. Less evidence, fewer memories, and more plausible denial makes this a great leap forward for the Gultram mind control chuckleheads who operate the systems and who are undoubtedly programmed using similar techniques. For example, if you believe the Columbine shootings were caused by Marilyn Manson lyrics or hidden backwards messages on rock music like the investigation tried to finger, then why wouldn't you believe that the military/CIA wouldn't use rock music and subliminal programming to kill people? Their tactics and technology of mind control and subliminal persuasion is so much more advanced than these simple messaging techniques. You are naive to believe such things caused the shootings. Please pay attention, ignore the man behind the curtain. This is how the mind melding works. EEG cloning, i.e. mind melding, or synchronizing of brainwaves has been known for half a century. The German Nazi scientists conducted countless brutal medical dissection on Jews. Not only were the Nazis close to building an atomic bomb, but from these experiments they had figured out how to control the human mind with just electromagnetic energy. These scientists were divided up between the Russians and the United States after World War II. They were brought over to the United States under Project Paperclip. For their loyalty they were forgiven for their war crimes. The United States and USSR began a new arms race. The first population-wide system came online sometime between 1953 and 1960. These systems often are guised as over-the-horizon radar or ionosphere research projects. Any sufficiently advanced technology will appear like magic to a lesser technologically advanced civilization. Isaac Asimov. The most basic mode first discovered was a simple amplification of brain waves. There are a couple patents that describe this in detail in the patent office. By feeding back EEG-like waveforms into the same brain, one amplifies thoughts. There are two types of brain amplification. One amplifies the synaptic modulation and the other amplifies brain entrainments, that is inducing more neurons to join a firing group at each pass or presentation of a stimuli. This is apparent from the project acronyms, TAMI and Satan. In this mode, one experiences sounds louder, vision brighter, and an attention deficient disorder, like condition. It also leads to a paranoid schizophrenic condition over time. It is a good way to incapacitate a target, as the military literature describes. In the patents that define this system, they used directed microwaves. But now what happens if you instead amplify one person's EEG signals by some method into another person's brain? That person would begin to think like the persons whose brain waves were being cloned onto him. They in fact, by all intensive purposes, become that person to a great extent. I'll leave the philosophy of this up to others. These people who have this done to them by choice or force are called psychics. It turns out that there are many methods and biochemical and biophysical mechanisms to induce synchronized brain entrainments. 3 recent Sony patents use ultrasonics to transfer the energy and signals. Other researchers have used magnetic coils, and electromagnetic frequencies that seem to traverse the spectrum up through microwaves. Even the modes of neural pathway induction vary from pulsed waveforms encoded by the pulse duration and timings to continuous ELF amplitude and phase modulated signals. It appears from the literature that many things work. Even sound and light flashing can entrance or entrain people's brains to follow the simple patterns. Now the third big area of research for the CIA in the past that leaves one scratching their heads as why our tax dollars would be going towards that endeavor is splitting personalities. Splitting personalities was a mechanism used to create and control the old-fashioned mind slave spies. The CIA call themselves handlers of these people. But interestingly enough, the effect of a hive mind is to create what appears to be a split personality if one didn't look behind the curtain to see who was pulling the levers. The hive mind EEG cloning experiments involve 2 to 6 people typically in a test cell. Cloning someone's mind onto someone else changes their personality and behavior. But in the best conditions, the entire body and will are taken over. Forced speech is one of the unsettling capabilities of the technology and the term used by people who have been given demonstrations of it. The best way to describe what a neural link feels like in a medium-intensity cloning signal, is it is a cell phone call with the caller's voice, emotion, and some physical urges transferred while they speak. This is why many victims talk to themselves. They actually are talking to someone else. With cell phone headsets getting smaller, more people are being accused of being crazy or being psychic. If the target does not move his/her mouth when the other people talk but he/she talks back by using his/her mouth, he/she is said to be talking to him/herself as psychologists describe. But if the person moves their mouth in sync with the speech from the cloner due to the cloning link intensity, they have multiple personalities according to the shrinks. In a strange way, they do have separate personalities. The neural modulation from the external cloning signal conveys certain aspects of the transferred brain entrainments. However, the target's sense of self is not usually lost due to the external cloning signal and the other person is still perceived as separate, much like how one doesn't get confused by a telephone conversation. Now, what if someone used voice transformation software and threw your own voice while you were talking on the phone using an earpiece? Could your mind get confused as to what was said by you and your sense of self blurred? Everyone gets a different subset of involuntary experiments conducted on them, but only a few get the whole shebang. The patterns are obvious. I am no Sherlock Holmes and I solved this age-old riddle in less than 6 months of interviewing people. Don't tell me that the most inept FBI agent investigating these X-files couldn't have solved it. The corruption and conspiracy are very real in this country. Mind magicians use sleight of mind tricks through strategic distractions. The government uses this technique all the time. The Iraq War is somewhat of a planned distraction away from what is happening domestically. More overtly, there have been many examples where strategic media leaks occur in order to change the focus of attention of the nation. Bush used it when he got caught with his NSA scandal. He tried to focus the attention on the whistleblowers rather than his illegal domestic spying practices. Even the NSA domestic spying scandal can be viewed as a charade compared to psychic spying and torturing of thousands of Americans. It pales in comparison as a newsworthy topic. Do you comprehend the magnitude of this discovery and technology yet? In the EEG hive mind, with equal weighting amongst all the participants, you have a severe problem with multiple foci of attention creating attention-deficient disorder-like symptoms. By reconfiguring the hive mind into a tree-like structure of EEG influence, the shared brain waves are more manageable. Also, after spending a lot of time adapting to each other's thoughts, there is less mental conflict. However, as a weapon, the tactic of diverting a thought of a target can be extremely useful in controlling their decisions or actions. Stupid alien tricks. Laughter is the best medicine. It helps us emotionally cope with potentially uncomfortable situations and slowly integrate disturbing new information. So, throughout our voyage we will be periodically entertained by the ship of fools in a segment called Stupid Alien Tricks. The first and most important stupid alien trick is to make the target think that the aliens have the capability to cause heart attacks or strokes. This is almost a universal prank and was used on Saddam Hussein in 1992 according to USA Today. Remember that with EEG heterodyning, the electromagnetic matrix, you only die if you believe that you can die. It is the panic and paranoia that causes the heart to race ever faster and causes the target to do irrational things dangerous to themselves. I know magicians are never supposed to reveal their tricks, but here is how it is done. During an attack, the brain waves of the attacker are more strongly amplified onto the target and the target's brain waves are only lightly amplified into the attacker. Simply by the psychic assailant pressing on their chest, spinning in their chair, and being out of shape and having their heart rate speed up from spinning in their chair, these sensations feel very scary to the target. They feel their heart pounding out of their chest. They feel the pain in their chest. And they are getting dizzy. The assailants can even make their left arm numb or cold by putting it in water to further the illusion. All the sensations are amplified into the target's mind. There will be more detail on this remote-controlled heart attack methodology later in the book, that was first described by Russian psychics back in the 1970s. The psychic army needs to practice on civilians because in my case the attacker thought the heart was in the right side of the chest. This spoiled the illusion for me. Silly aliens, tricks are for kids. Brain mapping and normalization software. You can get free brain mapping software from open source forums. The trick here is to align brain signatures. If the same stimulus is given to two individuals, their whole brain patterns will be close but different enough that it may make them incompatible for raw EEG heterodyning. Let's say a word is presented to two humans with similar cultures, their brains will produce similar waveforms for the given frequencies of interest and cascading sequences. That is the key. One must analyze the time sequence of the cognitive model. A famous example of this is called the multiple segment truck backing up problem. I used backpropagation neural networks to demonstrate it. The exact mathematical modeling doesn't matter as much as one would think. As Stephen Wolfram concludes in his book, A New Kind of Science, computation equivalence gives rise to the exact same subjective manifestation or model that we experience as consciousness. The cover of this book shows a mock graphical presentation of the DoD's brain mapping application. The only screenshot that I nearly exactly replicated was the psychic warfare training program nicknamed the Pain Game. The others I doctored to improve on their design. Brain signal filtering software. The other amazing technology that they have been working on for EEG heterodyning is brainwave sequence filtering. Clearly, when you mind meld with someone and you are the interrogator, you don't want them to read your bluffs or information from your brain. So they have developed frequency time filters to isolate types of brain information from being transferred. I am happy to report that they are still very flawed, and certain scanning and probing techniques that I will explain in detail in my next book work quite well at hacking the hacker's mind. The Science Channel produced a documentary called Spied Are Us. It has an episode on the CIA methods of hacking the human mind. But in that episode you will see the sleight of hand technique so often used. They talk about putting a video camera on flying model airplanes for surveillance around corners as a new CIA investment. This is to mislead people how advanced the state of the art actually is. I have a model airplane I built 15 years ago that does the same thing. There is a mechanical dragonfly in the CIA museum from 1970 that was a working spy cam. This is how your tax dollars are wasted just to mislead you, because you can't be trusted. Without the cloak and dagger ego currency for the boys that never grow up, how could they motivate this army of retards to attack their own people for weapons data? The Psychic Wars. I can't believe my business school classmates at Dartmouth would joke about how smart I was by asking me if I have been bending any spoons lately with my mind, and now I am writing about psychic wars. Truth is stranger than fiction. One objective of psychic attacks, or more accurately called EEG heterodyning attacks, is to screw up someone's visual perception. This is done by the EEG cloner almost always unbeknownst to the target. The psychic soldiers practice this mental trickery routinely in psychic war games conducted on people worldwide and talked about by Dr. Becker in a CNN interview on these weapons back in the 80s. I have been able to compile a comprehensive list of practiced illusions from my countless interviews with test subjects around the United States and the demonstration I was given. Referring to the Malak patent by Dorn and Company, the apparatus can detect if someone is hallucinating or cause hallucinations in them. The black magic practiced by the psychic warriors is mostly illusions and tricks of the mind. The game of psychic soldiers is to cause errors in thinking and perceiving. When brain waves are mixed, i.e. heterodyned, any auditory or visual misperceptions, that is errors, are transferred to the target. So psychic soldiers practice perceiving visual errors. Like one who stares at an autostereogram, see cover of book, if you relax your eye gaze, the dots below in the picture form a 3D pattern in your brain. This is an error of perception because there is no real object there. Oddly enough, this is what it takes to be a psychic attack soldier. In a near sensory deprivation setting, the heterodyned attacker sees in his mind's eye the same visual scene as the target. By focusing on bringing objects into the foreground that are normally in the background causes a parallax visual perception error in the target. This can be devastating while driving, since only road markers can be seen as cues to stay on the road at night. Flying at night like JFK Jr. did would pose another serious risk of disorientation. The attacker can also cross their eyes or focus on perceiving movement visually to disorient the target. You can try this yourself by turning your TV onto a station with just white noise. If you practice and concentrate, you can see the noise moving in any direction you want or cause other spinning patterns and such that are not truly there. It is almost purely random visual noise, but your expectations of what you think you should see cause the visual processing algorithms in your brain to converge on a faulty solution of the ill-posed vision problem. If the connection is strong, shadows and fully conjured images can be overlaid into the target's visual cortex. A strong connection depends on many factors discussed later. This random dot autostereogram features a raised shark with fine gradient on a flat background. From http://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/autostereogram. Another capability of the system is to drive the target crazy with voices, as one kernel published. This is like having a crying baby in a cell phone you can't turn off duct tape to each ear. If the conversation is bad enough, it could drive someone crazy over time. Another kernel said, if you can project voices into the enemy, I will talk them to their death. More likely to be used during a holy war, is being able to fake the voice of God, as the weapon's capability is often termed, and order them to lay down their arms or kill their comrades. More useful are the subliminal suggestions that can influence their actions and opinions without them being fully aware of the influence. We have gone so deep into the hole following this stupid white rabbit that we have almost reached hell. Stupid alien tricks. So, I admit it. I fell for it. Almost every victim tries the same defensive shielding approaches at great cost. Part of the strategy of the weapons testers is to deplete the victims of financial resources while by forcing the victims to spend all their money on defense research. One of the shielding approaches that everyone thinks of is a Faraday cage. It is supposed to stop low-frequency electric fields, but as one finds out, cell phones work in them, so they can't be that effective. Anyway, once I was completely contained in my Faraday cage, the abusive testers said, "Look, we caged our human animal. Now the real experiments can begin." I have to admit that I laughed aloud. They indeed have imprisoned me both physically and mentally now. Score 1 for the aliens. Examples of electronic warfare capabilities and other types of directed energy. The same radar and global surveillance grid of directed energy can be used for many other purposes than just human nervous system manipulation and disruption. Just through a satellite signal, the many segments of the United States power grid could be taken out. One capability that my EEG heterodyned experimenters told me about was that not only can they capture all electronic device signals and play them back like car locks, alarm systems and garage door openers, is that they can simultaneously hack all garage door opening systems in the United States, causing a power surge that will shut down power in many metropolitan cities, especially California, where consumption is at a critical capacity. Or they could set off all car alarm systems simultaneously, causing havoc. They even are working on testing a theory that they will blame on cyber terrorists. A computer virus that turns the computer into a radio frequency emitter that can hack external systems like garage doors at a specific time to see if they can cause a massive power outage with just a computer virus. The Russians were blamed for the computer virus called Satan 666 that was to cause heart arrhythmias by sending psychotronic signals through a computer monitor, but I suspect it came from the same source as most domestic espionage. Remember the game: more terrorism, more fear, more money and power for the defense industry. But more disturbingly, these power-obsessed agents bragged about how other Star Wars Initiative weapons they have access to could destroy most life on Earth. How? By systematically burning down all the world's forests and suffocating much of the life that requires oxygen. I'm sure it is true, since making powerful CO2 lasers that can start fires up to 2 miles away can be done by hobbyists. But don't fear, the aliens have nukes that could do it much quicker anyway. In addition, oxygen can be manufactured artificially. The military has documents that discuss hacking 802.11b wireless standard from their communications command structures. So even if your computer isn't connected to the internet, if you leave your wireless link on, the tax dollar-funded crooks can hack you. The first week when I was abducted, someone started hacking my computers from inside of Angelnet. I put tripwires in my system to see what they were looking for. They end up purging 7 years of my digital life. Obviously Angelnet could have been a reference to the book Angels Don't Play This Harp, and they were boldly saying that the harp antenna field has the ability to hack and read computers in this hemisphere. I assumed at the time it was a neighbor within 100 feet of my dwelling who was hacking my system as I watched them. I hate cyber terrorists and psychoterrorists. I am extremely disappointed that the majority of terrorism and psychos can be tracked right back to the CIA/shadow government. Stupid alien tricks. In order to test their abilities to intercept mobile phone communication and scramble it, the aliens exercise their power in several ways with the integrated signal and communication intelligence systems. Their cell phone jammers work quite well. Most victims describe no matter how often they move, this scenario occurs. They choose a location and check to make sure it gets great mobile phone reception. Once they move in, their mobile phone reception drops to zero after a week. My neurally linked brethren enjoyed telling me when I was about to receive a call on my phone, or they would tell me that I missed a call and often who it was. Other capabilities demonstrated on me, for example, one time when I called myself to record license plates of alien paparazzi, stalkers, on my voicemail, they told me to listen to the messages that I left myself. To my amazement, they had scrambled the packets from my phone to the message center. It was like every quarter second the voice information was reversed. So I sounded like I was speaking an alien language and the content was unintelligible for all of the messages. This capability was used in Operation Desert Storm on Iraqi generals with voice transformation software to mimic other generals. Back to unraveling the Matrix metaphor. In the movie, the heroes would get pulled out of electromagnetic matrix by a phone call. The reason for this is because the technology is based on the CIA program RHIC, Remote Hypnotic Intracerebral Control. The loud startling ringing of a phone breaks the hypnotic spell temporarily and pulls one out of the electromagnetic matrix world. Hypnosis is used both as a weapon and a necessary synchronized state for a strong bidirectional neural link. Aliens suck. We need to capture and dissent them to see what makes them so evil and sociopathic if we are to stop the spread of this cultural virus, this disease of the collective consciousness. Architecture of the Matrix. During the experiments, the data collectors perform tests of sentence completion and prediction probabilities. In another mode of TAMI, what sounds like multiple threads simultaneously running, about 10 to 20 possible completions of your precognitive thoughts or partially begun sentences are spoken back to you. They called these programs mimikants. Each one completed the thought or sentence differently. It was like a matrix of probabilities of previous sentence patterns used to guess, like fill-in-the-blank sentence completion on the SATs. It sounded exactly like the scene in The Matrix where Neo meets the architect. I have worked in both industry and for the Department of Defense on pattern recognition systems and artificial intelligence. I recognized much of my own type of work in TAMI's algorithms. Every classification category has a confidence metric associated with it. Sentence completion, word, image, and object recognition, etc., works on the same principles. Rather than just speaking back to the target the most probable speech pattern for completion, the top 10 responses were spoken back simultaneously. My mind seems to be too complex for their sentence completion algorithms to accurate forecast, and almost every thought sonorization was incorrect, but close enough for government work. Resonant feed-forward neural network for speech recognition. If you aren't a geek, you may want to skip this section. There are many artificial neural network models. One popular one is called backpropagation. Speech recognition software often uses classification algorithms called Markov modeling. All statistical classification algorithms have slightly different trade-offs in terms of ease of programming, invariance, and necessary training dataset size. There are two interesting observations to point out with TAMI. The Stanford Research Institute demonstrated an EEG inner voice recognition system back in the 70s. It classified certain brainwaves of a person's thinking about speaking a word, and it recognized the phonetic decomposition and spoke it aloud from a computer. This technology went black for several decades. Sequential brainwave entrainments for speech recognition in the Wernicke Center of the human brain. The other discovery for civilian scientists I would like to emphasize during the technology transfer demonstration for me by the DOD/CIA is that language, words, and sentences are created from time-sequenced frequency modes. That means that word understanding is a combination of sound perception, possibly induced by the microwave hearing effect, at the primitive level, and the state of prior presentations of the brain phonetic recognition resonant frequencies. So this means that the understanding of language only requires the correct sequence of induced currents in the brain based on achieving the new resonant state and not dependent on the exact timing between each state transition for the final recognition of a word. This is intuitive based on Markov models and resonant neural network state-dependent model theory. This is where the output of the neural network is looped back as the next state or inputs into the beginning of the network. Demonstrations of precognitive phoneme, word, and sentence classification, a subsystem of TAMI. People speak in fairly predictable sentence patterns. The sentence predictor software learns an individual's sentence patterns over months of training samples, correlating the precognitive word formations with the actual utterances. This system is a demonstration of precognitive recognition and classification of intent and would allow split-second faster reaction times if it were a physical intention that was being predicted. The Navy has done the most research in this area in regards to reading EEG signals for faster reaction times. However, this software's actual purpose is to be used to help with locking onto a host mind by helping the psychic soldier begin the same cognitive and linguistic brain patterns as the host so as to synchronize the entrainments more precisely. That is the main goal for psychic warriors. Better they become at locking on, adapting their minds to the host, the more control they have over the host mind, will, and then body, and better they can experience the target's thoughts, that is mind reading. The system repeats phrases over and over again to lock the host mind into that linguistic pattern until the host and target minds match above some threshold. Here is a screenshot inside the United States Psychic War Room, I mean the Borg Cube. The waveform on the left is some visual transformation of the psychic attacker's brain entrainments and activity, and the one on the right is the target. The graph in the middle below is a differential overlay of the two people and useful as visual feedback for the cloning army solider to acquire a lock-on. For a personality type that is not in the human mind database, EEG cloning takes a while to occur. The target, unbeknownst to them, are receiving the modulated brain signals of the attacker and vice versa. The neural networks of the combined mind begin to self-organize the shared data. In addition to the self-organizing feature of neural networks, the software behind the scenes is doing autocorrelation with some human intervention to map and align the variances of the two minds to speed along the process to full cloning capability. One simple method of breaking the cloning lock involves word games. By speaking nonsensical sentences that can't be predicted by the software and that the other person must think about to understand, the mind patterns separate for a brief time until the psychic attacker can reacquire the host brain patterns. Bilingual speakers can break the lock by switching to another language. Inner voice conversations, which are difficult if not impossible to avoid, strengthens the link, increasing all the shared perceptions, especially higher order mental functions like concepts. This is one of the main purposes of what is termed voice to skull. Longer a lock can be broken or disrupted, the more time it takes for it to be reacquired. See the section on anti-psychotronic theory for technologies that help break this lock. Neuromarketing has appeared many times in innovation and then disappeared. If the microwave hearing effect can be used to pipe in voice commands directly into the subconscious mind, you can imagine how powerful a marketing tool it would be. But for now, the DOD and intelligence communities circle around like vultures to intimidate any who works on such technologies. This is still a forbidden area of research. You must go abroad to work on it. ELISA and natural language processing using phonemes from brain waves. The ultra programming also adds an element of automation to creating your private purgatory. ELISA was a computer program back in the 70s which demonstrated artificial intelligence. It acted like a psychologist and asked stupid questions and responded to answers. It would parse and understand sentences. This field is called NLP, natural language processing, not to be confused with NLP, neural linguistic programming. ELISA fooled about half the people who communicated with it into believing it was a real human being on the other end. Now, fast forward 35 years, and instead of parsing natural language phrases from keystrokes, it recognizes phonetic brain waves and parses them into words and sentences for artificial intelligence and natural language processing. This was demonstrated by the Stanford Research Institute in the 70s. Now the tortures and menticizations can scale to entire populations through this automation. I call one of Tammy's functions a sentence stimulator. For many of the test subjects, they describe the conversations in their head as very artificial and with almost no intelligence and very repetitive and limited in terms of topics of discussion. This would describe about the current state of the art. Artificial intelligence and natural language processing were other areas of interest that I studied at Harvard. I worked on a program that was to show emotion based on the probable frustration level of the computer user, which was based on the frequency of errors and crashes. The brainwave cognitive ELISA adds realism by inducing an empathetic emotion with the words that the target feels. This adds a new dimension of convincing information that the synthetic mind virus is a real person. Neural linguistic programming, NLP, was first introduced into the Army and pursued as a weapon by the infamous Colonel John Alexander. These brainwashing techniques fit quite intuitively into the capabilities of Tammy. I endured about 2 months of this kind of repetitive programming, which basically consists of repetitive overt suggestion, very similar to a technique called psychic driving invented by the CIA paid torture specialist Dr. E. Cameron. It wasn't very effective on me, so I'm not very impressed by the technique and think that NLP masters are joke profession. However, the national anthem psychically driven at every sporting event seems to work quite well. However, due to the large numbers of people that this is done to and the often full-time aspect of the constant babble, it would make sense that they would switch over the live hive mind participants to an automated system so that they could move on while both maintaining the illusion of a live neural link and a psychosis that never heals. Then only a single moderator would be needed to monitor the interactions of several targets in case the link failed for any number of reasons. Synthetic telepathy. Phoneme recognition uses some brain waves from the premotor cortex for tongue, mouth, and throat and the audio cortex recall to be amplified and rebroadcast into another mind, which is then perceived as speech and sound. It turns out that speech is not encrypted in the brain as much as one would think. There is a direct mapping between sound recall and speech phonemes with their audio wave analog. This was first demonstrated with EEG probes at the Stanford Research Institute. Design flaws with TAMI. TAMI has a voice recognition interface that the EEG cloners use during collection of internal sentences for training TAMI's precognitive sentence prediction software. The cloners would say "shut up TAMI," as a computer voice recognized phrase, in order to increase the recognition threshold confidences. The problem with the interface design is that the attacker can be hacked by the target. The system does not distinguish between any of the internal voices of the collective hind mind. See Hacking the Eye Gaze Tracker interface. System flaws with TAMI. As with any system where a signal is amplified and fed back to the sensor, oscillations can occur known as feedback. This also applies to amplified brain waves. They are working on finding fixes for these feedback conditions. Two examples can be found in synthetic telepathy. The first kind of feedback loop occurs at the phrase level where a decaying echo of the phrase is heard and repeated. The second one is at a sound perception level. Almost everyone who is EEG heterodyned and not just cloned, hears a tinnitus at some point. If a psychic cloner is just replicating your brain waves onto his, there is no feedback loop. Feedback only occurs when the psychic is trying to influence you in a two-way brain entrainment lock. The tinnitus is caused by several signals, but the loudest steady-state tone is due to the feedback loop generated from the host's hearing, being amplified to the parasite and mixed with his brain waves, and then amplified again and sent back to the host. The feedback frequency is usually around 11,111 Hz. Like with a microphone too close to a speaker, they have come up with some unusual ways to break the feedback loop. The feedback is automatically detected and a strong secondary pulsing frequency is injected that is slightly off the feedback frequency, which overpowers the conscious focus on the feedback base frequency. This slight change of attention in the brain dampens the tinnitus frequency attenuation and returns the signals to controlled levels, and synthetic telepathy can again be heard. This flaw can be a point of detection and defense. Using a tone generator, a target can identify his/her feedback frequency. Playing an overpowering sound at the tinnitus frequency with various modulations, preferably into each ear, will lock into place the feedback loop, thereby rendering a voice-to-skull attack void. However, the annoying high-pitch ring is distracting and could still cause some decreased attention to tasks at hand. Another method the weapons designers came up with is to distract the target's attention from the feedback frequency using body jerks. A sequence of small, random limb jerks automatically begins when the feedback frequency is maintained for a few seconds. This too can dampen the brainwave amplification of that signal in order to regain two-way communications. The brain signals of sound perception that are causing feedback are a transformation of actual frequencies, so the appropriateness of the analogy of a microphone too close to the speaker is limited. Even longer time frame feedback loops exist in heterodyned hive minds. Everyone has encountered something like this while just walking down the street. You see an oncoming pedestrian and you veer to the left. At the same time, the pedestrian veers to his right. You then respond by correcting the other way, and in return he does too. You find yourselves in a comedic dance with a stranger. Most victims of government practice torture and kill programs die unnatural deaths from car crashes, heart attacks, suicide, and cancer that the weapons test program managers justify mostly as secondary effects from the testing. While there are many purposeful attempts to make people crash, most crashes are probably caused by secondary effects. Driving while talking on the cell phone has been compared to being legally drunk in terms of increased risks due to the distraction. Similarly, voice-to-skull harassment is a much more profound distraction with proportionately increased risks. But an anomalous feedback loop of physical intentions also occurs, decreasing the ability of a target to operate a plane or vehicle properly. EEG hive mind participants share almost every desire from hunger to scratching an itch. When one person is driving and pressing on the gas or brake pedal, the other people in the hive mind have the urge to tap their foot. Their urge to tap their foot is amplified back to the driver, who then presses harder or softer on the gas. It leads to a very jerky ride. It is the same comedic dance that occurs with pedestrians avoiding each other. In engineering, this feedback system is called resonance or instability due to underdampening of the signal. In response to these higher-level brain-patterned resonances, brainwave filtering methods are being developed to dampen all these abnormalities that occur in the most wasteful and unnatural configurations of brains currently being researched, called EEG cloned hive minds. This is how your tax dollars are being wasted and keeping the aliens on welfare. Stupid alien tricks. The aliens often amused themselves by leaving clues in their words spoken to their projects. One of the phrases they repeated over and over again to me was, "You are the one." This is a clear reference to Neo in the movie The Matrix, who everyone referred to as the One. Neo was the one whom the Oracle prophesied would save the humans from the machines. Well, as I conducted more research, to my surprise the pitch of my newly acquired tinnitus was exactly 11,111. The aliens laughed at my discovery and it was never mentioned again. I hate aliens. Screenshot of Satan's GUI, eye gaze tracking interface. To start up a torture, the eyes drag the menu item to a sandbox area that activate it. Another menu on the sandbox shows a menu list of all active tortures, and by selecting one and dragging it back to the other menu area it is deactivated. The lettering on the pull-down menu items have a cryptic language on them. It looks like a combination of Russian, Greek, English, Egyptian, Japanese, and Chinese characters with a hieroglyphic twist. Remember the matrix code that drips down the screen? For each menu item in the eye gaze interface, there is a unique blend of symbols derived from the various languages of the planet. It was created so that it can be used by and on any nationality in the world without clues to the real country of origin doing the attacking in case there is a visual filter breach and the target sees the screen. That is why it looks both alien and native. The matrix code characters which stream down the screen are really just the pull-down menus expanding and then submenus expanding with this language-independent interface. Interesting to see how it was interpreted in the movie. See the document in the appendix on NASA's mind control program with children. NASA conducted mind control on children as testified by an astronaut. The children who are grown up now were involved in ultra-like programs and have recovered most of their memories. One child says that they were trained to read intergalactic symbols developed by NASA for the purpose of communicating with extraterrestrial civilizations. It is these symbols that are used on the Satan torture and psychic warfare interface that I have seen and approximated in the screenshots in the movie, The Matrix. They were not developed for speaking to extraterrestrial aliens, but just the evil ones born here on Earth. Scary alien quotes. Will you tell anyone that we planned the assassination of Kennedy and screwed up Michael Dukakis's speeches? We've done this to so many doctors, none of whom could figure it out. We are going to turn a Harvard grad into a homeless bum within a year unless you can stop us. If you can do it to you, we can do it to anyone. Capabilities and uses of Tammy, Satan, and Mind. Remote-controlled heart attacks. Don't panic. There are two methods used to induce heart attacks by electromagnetic energy. Here is the trick behind the first method of remote-controlled heart attacks and how you can defend against them. It was theorized by Russian scientists that a runaway adrenal panic process in conjunction with stimulating the heart to beat faster and causing some vasoconstriction could lead to a heart attack. This was done on me several times where I passed out on one occasion, but I am young and healthy. It would definitely work on the elderly. It is mostly a head game. It is true that they can speed up the heart rate with EEG brain waves. Many of the brain waves are above 60 Hz, and they can cause vasoconstriction, but the designer of us in his great wisdom made it nearly impossible for our minds, even in extreme fear and panic, to kill the body or literally to be scared to death. The best motto for an EEG clone remote control heart attack attempt is, if it is satanic, don't panic. If you know how the effect works and you have beta blockers or Valium on hand, it will be impossible for them to accomplish it. They will cause imaginary heart pains. They will make your left arm feel cold and numb. Check your pulse, it will be within tolerable limits. It is merely a trick to make you think they have this capability. Beta blockers block the signal from the brain that will increase the heart rate. Many people suffer panic attacks that they mistake for heart attacks and call an ambulance. I would bet that when all is known in 20 or 30 years on these mass experiments on the public, that panic attacks will drop off significantly because most are caused by the weapons testing groups without the microwave hearing effect telling them what is happening. All the voice-to-skull attacks on people are scripted performances by the human effects weapons testers. They follow the exact same series of events with just the details tailored to the individual. It is very advantageous to the humans that the machine is predictable and uncreative. Here are the main points of panic that they will use against a victim who hasn't read this book. 1. Your brain is being fried by microwaves. There is a 5% increase risk for brain and other cancers for these experiments according to my government sources, but this is insignificant compared to the number of years of your life they take through the stress of believing they are cooking you. 2. Once you understand what EEG cloning is, you can see how ridiculous these big bad psychic attackers really are. Everything you feel, they feel amplified and vice versa. They have developed a few brainwave filters for certain types of brain activity, but on the most part, you both are of one single mixed mind. So they might say, "We are giving you a stroke." You will feel a strange sensation like what you might imagine as blood leaking into your head. While in reality, the psychic attacker puts water on his/her hands and is dampening their scalp. It really is this pathetic. This is like when children pretend they are breaking eggs on other children's head by slowly running their fingers in a spreading gelatinous mess-like motion. 3. We are cooking your heart muscle. The psychic attackers press on their chest or play a pre-recorded heartache to further this illusion of mind. Remember, in these mind control experiments, it is only brain waves that are being manipulated, no matter how real anything feels. You can't trust any of your senses. 4. We are going to kill your entire family and all your friends if you tell anyone. Quite the opposite is true. Informing a few trusted friends what is happening would more likely keep you from disappearing without a trace. Do not go to the police or FBI. They will lock you up in the psych ward. That probably should go for all rape victims, mental rapes, or physical. Most authorities are not smart enough or educated enough to understand the physics behind these weapons, so don't bother trying to update them. Many hundreds have tried and failed. You will learn in time that all the threats made by synthetic telepathy from guys probably based in Virginia are empty. 5. If they are able to raise your sensitivity levels to paranoid through the stalking program and threats, you will begin to attribute every bad luck event in your life to them. This creates an illusion that they have lots of power over your life. Be logical and practice double-checking your conclusions. 6. We have the police in our pockets and they will plant drugs on you. While there are a few CIA and other agents posing as California Highway Patrol that might do that, there is still no reason to panic because there is nothing you can do to avoid that level of corruption. Deal with it if it happens the best you can. 7. Also, once they have you believing that they are going to destroy everything in your life that you value, your mind starts thinking of ways they might do it. EEG cloning allows the psychic attackers to read every little fear that crosses your mind, and they are trained to use them against you. Remember that. Practiced positive thinking can help thwart this kind of attack of using your own mind against you. 8. Visual imagery of demons and such that victims report as holograms or materializations are often used to frighten the more superstitious and religious types. This is the traditional haunting and ghost imagery method. I do not want to take away from the fact that the prolonged experimental process is incredibly debilitating due both to the constant various pain and a severe distraction of noise piped into your head. It will, to say the least, ruin your life as you had planned it. But you need to accept your temporary slavery status, and move towards educating more people. The mass information streams have been locked up, so grassroots efforts and some creative thinking is needed to scale and spread this information. Remember the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy's advice: don't panic. The second method of remote-controlled heart attacks is more direct. The heart, like the brain, uses patterns of electrical signals to maintain its function. Disrupting the regular electrical pattern can under certain circumstances cause fibrillation or over prolonged periods, heart arrhythmias. Precisely timed pulses or electrical resonance modulation of the heart will cause the heart to skip a beat and decrease the overall compression force of each stroke. These more direct methods can be thwarted with a thick leather jacket, many test survivors have stated. Leather acts like an external skin and absorbs much of the radar energy before entering the body. However, I was a bit cocky during these remote assassination attempts and let them do their worst for 5 hours until they gave up and were convinced that this method was not enough to work on me. These are the weapons of silent assassination being touted as non-lethal because their dial-in effects kill settings are still not satisfactorily predictable. Stay